Chapter 367. Gong Yimo was frightened by his stare and became discouraged. She then glared at Longqing Wuji, and you. Gong Dai is right. You should deal with your women first. Moreover, you still have work to do tomorrow. Can you not have those weird thoughts? Longqing Wuji was not convinced. Gong Yimo, I must have you. Gong Dai's killing intent exploded as he narrowed his eyes and walked towards Longqing Wuji. At that moment, Gong Yimo really felt that Gong Dai was going to kill her. So Gong Yimo held on tightly to Gong Dai and cried, Ancestor. You are all ancestors, okay? I'm so tired. I want to go back and rest. Gong Dai thought that it would not be too late to go back and rest after killing Longqing Wuji. But Gong Yimo suddenly let go and angrily stomped her foot. Forget it. You guys can play around. I don't care anymore. Don't follow me. Saying that, she got on her horse and ran away. Seeing Gong Yimo leave just like that, Gong Dai was worried that she would not continue to tangle with Longqing Wuji. So he directly got on another horse and ran towards Gong Yimo. Poor Lu Yi King was left alone by the sacred lake. He did not regain his senses for a long time and finally clenched his teeth. Gong Dai. He did not believe that he could not win against a 17-year-old brat. The night wind blew on Gong Yimo's somewhat hot face. Just now when Gong Dai kissed her forcefully, her whole body was burning up and she did not dare to face him. But Gong Dai actually caught up from behind. Although she did not turn around, Gong Yimo knew that it must be Gong Dai. Scary. Didn't he want to fight? Thinking of this, she hurriedly used her best riding skills to rush forward. She couldn't let Gong Dai catch up to her. Gong Dai's equestrian skills were also very good, but there was still some distance between him and Gong Yimo. At this moment, he saw that no matter how he chased, he was still a horse's length away from Gong Yimo. He pursed his lips and smiled. Royal sister, if you don't stop, I'm going to jump over. Gong Yimo heard his voice transmitted through his inner energy. Every word seemed to contain some kind of smile, which made her face burn even more. She wanted to run even faster. I'll count to 3 and jump over. Gong Dai's cold voice sounded again with a hint of laughter. Gong Yimo did not believe him at all. She was running so fast. Gong Dai would only do this if he didn't want his life anymore, because he couldn't jump on her horse. If he really did, he would definitely fall off the horse. Anyway, he was so strong that he wouldn't die from the fall. She wouldn't be soft-hearted. Perhaps he was deliberately scaring her to make her stop. 1. Gong Yimo hesitated for a moment. Should she slow down? If he didn't die from the fall, it would be troublesome if he broke his leg or something. 3. Gong Yimo was shocked and subconsciously pulled the reins tightly. Oh. The horse under her ran forward a few steps due to inertia before it raised its front hooves and almost flipped Gong Yimo over. Gong Dai's horse quickly brushed past her horse. Gong Dai was no longer on it. Did he really jump? Before she came to a stop, she quickly turned back to see how Gong Dai was doing. She felt warmth behind her. In this situation, Gong Dai successfully landed on her horse and hugged her. The horse had just stopped, so Gong Dai kicked it with his leg and it started to slowly move forward. This process was too thrilling. Gong Dai almost fell off the horse if she didn't pull the reins in time. Gong Yimo panted slightly and patted her chest. Her little heart was beating very fast. After calming down a little, she turned back angrily and pinched Gong Dai's waist. Where's 2? Did you eat 2? How can you shout 1 and then 3? You did it on purpose. You scared me to death. Gong Dai took advantage of her inattention and flipped her around so that she was facing him. Gong Yimo didn't realize what was happening, but Gong Dai had already grabbed her hand tightly. She looked up and almost drowned in his bright black eyes. I did it on purpose because I knew that you would definitely catch me. You said that you like me. How can you bear to let me fall to my death? Gong Yimo couldn't help but stare at him. You deserve to fall to your death. This bastard. However, Gong Ju's big hand pressed down on her back, and her whole body fell onto his chest. Her small mouth was fiercely sucked into Gong Ju's mouth. He hugged her very passionately, and his kiss almost melted her in an instant. Their heartbeats hadn't even calmed down when they started to pound even harder. Gong Yimo felt like she was falling into a fog. Her wide eyes blinked blankly, and Gong Dai took the opportunity to deepen the kiss. The two of them kissed while sitting on the horse in such an embarrassing position. Under the moonlight, in the wilderness, it was really too shameless. Gong Yimo's face turned red. It was such a hot position, and the most important thing was that the horse was still moving. It was so embarrassing. She quickly backed away and glared fiercely at Gong Dai. Fortunately, there was no one around. Otherwise, her reputation as the eldest princess of Dai Yu State's Gu country would be completely disgraced by Gong Dai. Can you stop messing around? Can you restrain yourself a little? She poked Gong Dai with her tender finger and tried to persuade him with a helpless expression. Gong Dai laughed. His voice was clear and sounded a little cold in the night, but more importantly, it sounded happy. I can't restrain myself. He actually dared to shake his head and stared at Gong Yimo. Royal sister is so dazzling. Wherever she goes, she attracts a group of wild bees and butterflies. If I restrain myself, the royal sister will be snatched away. His words didn't sound like he was wronged. Gong Yimo lowered her head in shame and tried to quibble. They're probably blinded by my intelligence, so they're using this method to keep me. Actually, I think this is a conspiracy. Gong Dai nodded repeatedly. Yes, they're all fake, but I'm real. He would never let go of any opportunity to elevate himself and suppress his opponents. Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. So, don't be so possessive. Gong Dai hugged her tightly again. He told her firmly, I won't. But his face was filled with happiness and helplessness. His royal sister would never know how dazzling she was. Those men had really fallen in love with her, how annoying. It was still better to be in the cold palace. He didn't have to worry about those prying eyes. But now, not only did he have to worry about blood relations, he also had to deal with opponents from all directions. He had to be strong. Yes, he had found another excellent reason for himself to work hard. The night was as cool as water. There were stars and wind. The two of them walked slowly like this. When they reached Luyi, Gong Yimo was already sound asleep. It couldn't be helped. After all the torment today, she was already mentally and physically exhausted. So, she fell asleep in Gong Dai's arms. Gong Dai planted a kiss on her forehead. Very good, let's continue like this. He felt that he was about to succeed. Chapter 368. The next day, Gong Yimo was woken up by the noise outside. When she woke up, she saw Gong Dai sitting by the bed with a cold expression. He smiled when he saw Gong Yimo wake up. Royal sister, why don't you sleep a little longer? Gong Yimo rubbed her eyes. Why is it so noisy outside? She wanted to get up, but Gong Dai pressed her down and said in a serious tone, sleep a little longer, it's still early. Gong Yimo felt that it was a little strange. At this moment, an angry female voice came from outside. Gong Yimo, you're so cruel. They were coming for her. Gong Dai secretly frowned. If it wasn't for the fact that it wasn't good to cause trouble in Lu Ye's palace, he really wanted to throw those people out. What was Dragon City Everlasting doing? He just went out to kill someone, why wasn't he done yet? Gong Yimo couldn't lie down anymore and wanted to go out to take a look. Gong Dai said unhappily. Don't bother, this is Lu Ye's matter, it has nothing to do with us. Gong Yimo pouted, we can't just stay in the room and ignore her because of her noise, right? As she said that, she got up to take a look. Gong Dai had no choice but to follow. Although he had been accompanying Royal Sister, it wasn't like he didn't hear the noise outside. He understood that some people were unnecessary. The more you paid attention to them, the happier they would be. Gong Dai summoned a person and ordered the Imperial Guards to send 100 people to wait for orders. Then, he followed. Gong Dai's action was inappropriate and could even be considered a provocation. But who asked Dragon City Everlasting to be so useless? He said that he was going to execute Flower Boat Worryless, but he still hadn't returned and wanted him to do it himself. When Gong Yimo went out, she saw a group of women. The strange thing was, just as she was wondering why Dragon City Everlasting wasn't around, she remembered that Dragon City Everlasting had sent someone to inform her that he was going to execute Flower Boat Worryless with the people from the Sacred Lake. But as soon as he left the palace, these people came in. They were too careless. Gong Yimo thought that it might be a certain little mouse that was unwilling to give up and wanted to let someone in to find trouble with her. The moment they saw Gong Yimo come out, the group of women rushed forward like crazy, as if they wanted to force her back. The leader's hand almost grabbed Gong Dai, but she was kicked away by Gong Dai. He didn't have a principle of not hitting women. There was only a difference between those who deserved to be hit and those who shouldn't. He used a bit of strength in his kick, and a large number of people behind him fell down in order to catch the girl. This was also good, Gong Yimo did not want to fight with these people. At this moment, there were only a few guards in front of her courtyard. The others had probably been transferred away. Gong Yimo couldn't help but sigh. Long Cheng's Ting Shui and the others were really forcing her to not let them off. The groaning on the ground turned into curses. Before they could get up, Gong Dai's people had already rushed in and instantly blocked the entire courtyard. Someone even brought chairs for Gong Yimo and Gong Dai to sit down and talk. She sighed. All right, now can someone tell me what's going on? Why are you making so much noise? Gong Dai's Imperial Guards separated the people one by one. Those women wearing Lu Ye's clothes stared at Gong Yimo but couldn't move. One of them said angrily, Goddess is going to be killed by you. You can still sleep, do you still have a conscience? Gong Yimo couldn't understand her logic and simply ignored her. She only looked at the woman who had been kicked down by Gong Dai. The corners of her mouth were stained with blood, but the way she glared at Gong Yimo was as if she wanted to eat her up. You will suffer retribution. Gong Yimo looked at her eyebrows that were similar to Hua Zhouwuyo's and suddenly realized, you're Hua Zhouwuyo's mother. In Lu Yi, there was no distinction between the legitimate wife and concubine. Generally, they were separated by seniority. Hua Zhouwuyo was ranked 4th and was born from a concubine. She asked in puzzlement, why are you looking for me? People who do bad things will naturally suffer retribution, but I didn't do anything bad, so I'm sitting here perfectly fine. Did you find the wrong person? Bah! She said fiercely, all of this was clearly set up by you. Wuyo is such a kind child, how could she do such a thing? You vicious woman. You must be eyeing the position of princess consort, so you set Wuyo up like this. Bitch, you'll die a horrible death. Before Gong Yimo could say anything, Gong Dai's cold gaze landed on her. Before she could say anything, an Imperial Guard immediately came forward to slap her. That strength was clearly not treating her as a woman. The other women who came along didn't dare to speak, afraid that they would be treated the same way. Gong Dai sneered and said to Gong Yimo, "Royal sister, Lu Ye's palace is so unruly. You're not worthy to talk to such people." Gong Yimo narrowed her eyes and sized them up. She suddenly asked, "How long have they been making a scene here?" "Almost the entire morning." Gong Dai didn't pay much attention to it. Gong Yimo turned back to look. "They excitedly came here and made a scene for the entire morning, but they didn't dare to enter the door. Originally, there were only 2 guards in front of the door." She frowned. "These people seem to be deliberately looking for trouble, hoping to make me shut the door and not come out. From the looks of it, something must have happened outside." Gong Dai casually grunted. Whether something happened to Lu Yi or not had nothing to do with him. Anyway, with him here, even if Lu Yi overturned the heavens, he wouldn't be able to hurt Gong Yimo in the slightest. Unexpectedly, Lu Yi really wanted to overturn the heavens. Amidst the flames, a flower boat Wuyo was tied to the firewood building. She looked down at the commoners who were looking at her with indignant expressions. In the next moment, she was going to be burned to death. But strangely, there was no fear on her face. Instead, she looked at the people with a compassionate expression, as if she was wronged and was going to die unjustly. Longqing Wuji knelt on the high platform in front of the Eagle Deity Temple. At this time, his back was exposed, and there were traces of being whipped. At this time, the whip was passed to the hands of an old man. He was one of the leaders of the Huaqing tribes. Originally, after experiencing yesterday's farce, he had thought of leaving Huaqing. But today, other than executing the heinous crime of flower boat Wuyo, Longqing Wuji also knelt down to apologize to the Eagle Deity. Moreover, on the high platform in front of the Eagle Deity Temple, he let the other leaders of the tribes who had sided with him whip him to atone for their sins. The old man sighed. In the end, the whip couldn't fall down. He knelt down, and when he knelt, all the other leaders knelt down as well. "King, this isn't your fault. Even if it is your fault, we have seen your sincerity. We won't blame you. You are still the hope of all the leaders of the tribes. Please get up." Longqing Wuji lowered his head and said guiltily, "No, I have failed to live up to your expectations." One was his fiancée, the other was his sister. He couldn't absolve himself from the blame. The old man sighed and stood up to help Longqing Wuji up. "Lu Ye's eagle son, shouldn't be so weak. Since you know you are wrong, you should go and correct your mistakes." As he said that, he passed a torch to Longqing Wuji and pointed at flower boat Wuyo. The old man's face was filled with resentment. "Now, you should go and burn her to death." Chapter 369. Burn her to death. Burn Hua Zhou Wuyu, burn her to death. Hearing the angry voices of the crowd, Longqing Wuji tightened his grip on the torch and walked towards Hua Zhou Wuyu. "Brother Wuji, are you really going to burn me to death?" Hua Zhou Wuyu's eyes were filled with tears. Longqing Wuji nodded coldly. This was the Sacred Lake's request. If it was him, he wouldn't kill Hua Zhou Wuyu. At most he would send her to Poluo Mountain to cultivate, never to leave the mountain. After all, Hua Zhou Wuyu was guilty. As her fiancé, he didn't notice her abnormality, he was even more guilty. However, Flower Boat Worryless was the goddess of the Holy Lake. The Holy Lake had the right to punish her. Now that the Holy Lake wanted to burn Flower Boat Worryless to death, Dragon City Everlasting had begged for mercy, but the Holy Ancestor had insisted. Seeing him nod, Hua Zhou Wuyu's face gradually twisted. "Then why don't you burn your sister to death? She was also involved in this matter, why do I have to die, but she can marry someone else?" Longqing Wuji said softly, "This is the Sacred Lake's intention." Sacred Lake. Hua Zhou Wuyu suddenly gritted her teeth. That old fart, he isn't even one of Lu Ye's people. Now that he has inherited Lu Ye's Sacred Lake, it's fine if he doesn't help Lu Ye's people, but because of that slug Gong Yimo, he's treating me like this. When Longqing Wuji heard this, he felt that there was something going on. But before he could ask, Hua Zhou Wu Yu's face suddenly changed. Since that's the case, then all of you can die. All of you can die. Following her words, countless troops surged out from all directions, surrounding the entire Eagle God Temple's plaza. The entire place was in a state of panic, and only Hua Zhou Wuyo was laughing loudly. If you want me to die, then all of you can die first. Her gaze landed in a corner, revealing an aggrieved expression. Brother, save me. Longqing Wuji looked over, then squeezed out a few words, Hua Zhou Jin Yan. You dare to betray me. Hua Zhou Jin Yan, Lu Ye's great general who never missed his target. Gong Yimo had suffered in his hands before. At this moment, his face was still covered in a beard, and his expression was resolute as he spoke. I can't watch you burn Worryless to death. The moment he returned, he heard the news. Flower Boat Worryless was his most cherished younger sister. He could not let her die. Longqing Wuji was furious. So you betrayed me for a woman. Good, very good. Hua Zhou Jinyan did not dare to look at Longqing Wuji's face. Once the Hua Zhou family betrayed them, Longqing Wuji would be in a very passive position. This was because 1/3 of Longqing Wuji's power had been given to Hua Zhou Jinyan, and with the addition of the Hua Zhou family, Longqing Wuji would be in a very passive position. Hua Zhou Wuyo sneered. She looked at Longqing Wuji with eyes full of pity. Who told you to treat me like this? Cousin, don't worry, I won't kill you. I still want to marry you. At the same time, although she was still tied to the woodshed, her eyes were filled with undisguised killing intent as she looked at the panicked crowd below. But you people actually dared to disrespect me. You will all die. You will all die. Sister. Hua Zhou Jinyan shouted. Just as he was about to save her, Longqing Wuji laughed. Baiji Ziren, are you still not coming out? With a light cough, a young man in white walked out calmly. He was not dressed like Lu Yi, but in the Central Plains. However, everyone present was shocked when they saw him. In a short period of time, no one could mobilize too many troops. For example, Hua Qing had 8,000 troops. 3,000 of them were given to Hua Zhou Jinyan, while Longqing Wuji had 5,000. However, with the Hua Zhou family's betrayal, there were many warriors in the Hua Zhou tribe. Even if time was tight, there were still 4,000 to 5,000 people. Therefore, they had the advantage in numbers. If they really caught Longqing Wuji off guard and killed him and the leaders of the Hua Qing tribe here, the rebellion would be considered a success. But now there was Baiji Ziren. Who knew how many warriors from the Baiji family he had brought with him? After a moment of panic, Hua Zhou Jinyan said in a low voice, My people have sealed off the city roads. Even if Baiji's people sneak in, there will be no more than 2,000 of them. King, you should admit defeat. I have more people than you, and all of them are brave and good at fighting. He analyzed calmly. Although time was tight and he did not expect Longqing Wuji to be on guard, they still had a slight advantage. Then, what if I join in? At this time, Gong Yimo walked over with a smile. She was tall, but what was more obvious was the 2,000 imperial guards behind her who were emitting a murderous aura. This made Hua Zhou Jinyan frown. He felt that his father was really incompetent. Didn't he say that he would force Gong Yimo to not appear? Why did she still come? In fact, he had really wronged his father. If they fought, he would not be able to win against Gong Dai and the Imperial Guards. If they exchanged benefits, he was not willing to do that to Gong Yimo, who had harmed them. Therefore, he did something stupid. He thought that Gong Yimo would not make things difficult for some weak women and children, which led to the scene in the morning. His thinking was right. However, Gong Yimo would not harm women and children, but Gong Dai did not have such principles. Longqing Wuji's eyes lit up when he saw Gong Yimo. The atmosphere at the scene became strange again. Hua Zhou Wuyo was a little scared. He glanced at his brother, and finally turned to Gong Ju and said, "Gong Ju. Gong Dai, are you really going to help Longqing Wuji? He has his eyes on your sweetheart." Gong Dai turned a deaf ear. He could not be bothered to talk to such a person. Seeing that Gong Dai could not get through, Hua Zhou Wuyo gritted her teeth and said to Gong Yimo, "Gong Yimo. A straightforward person does not resort to insinuations. I was wrong before, but as long as you help me, I promise that I will give you a generous reward." Gong Yimo did not expect the situation to take such a turn. Her eyes lit up and she hurriedly asked, "How generous?" Longqing Wuji was almost angered to death when he saw Gong Yimo's greedy look. What she could give, he could not. Hua Zhou Wuyo did not expect Gong Yimo to be so straightforward. She frowned. Hua Zhou Jinyan looked at the girl who almost died in his hands and said in a low voice, "Help me. When I become a king, I will marry you." When he said that, before Gong Yimo could vomit blood, Gong Dai looked over with a murderous gaze. He knew that Lu Yi was not a good person. And each of them was delusional. Shoo shoo shoo. Who cares? Gong Yimo wrinkled her little nose. Give me some real benefits. At this moment, Longqing Wuji spoke. His tone was very serious. Gong Yimo, as long as you help me get rid of them, Lu Yi will provide all the horses that the Three Kingdoms Horse Club needs. Gong Yimo nodded repeatedly. Hua Zhou Jinyan panicked. If you help the Hua Zhou family, I am willing to give 3 Lu Yi border cities to Dai Yu State. As soon as he said this, Longqing Wuji immediately roared, Hua Zhou, watch your words. You are betraying your country. Hua Zhou Jinyan ignored him. He only looked at Gong Yimo with a heavy gaze. In the face of great benefits, Gong Yimo should know how to choose. He knew very well that in the face of absolute benefits, all alliances could be destroyed. Gong Yimo opened her little mouth and looked at everyone in shock. She had only said it casually. Why did they all take it seriously? At this time, Gong Ju suddenly spoke. He smiled at Longqing Wuji and said in a quiet tone, I will add one more condition. As long as you can swear that you will never covet royal sister again, I will help you. Chapter 370. His eyes were cold as he asked in a serious tone. Deal? When he said that, Gong Yimo and Longqing Wuji were stunned. Gong Yimo sighed. Could he not make such a request at such a serious moment? She felt everyone's eyes on her. No matter how thick-skinned she was, she felt embarrassed. But Gong Yimo was the only one who thought that Gong Dai was joking. Everyone present could tell that he was serious. Gong Dai was not a person who could be judged purely by good or bad. If he did not agree, no one knew what he would do. Everyone thought that Longqing Wuji would agree easily. Gong Dai was an unpredictable person. If he did not agree, what if Gong Dai really helped Hua Zhou's family? Originally, it was fine if Gong Dai's people did not appear. Longqing Wuji felt that he might not lose. But now that he appeared, things became troublesome. You don't agree? Gong Dai raised his eyebrows slightly. That threatening tone of his made the entire place fall into a strange silence. Longqing Wuji gritted his teeth. Gong Dai, you're too despicable. Is that so? Gong Dai reached out and stroked Gong Yimo's hair. He smiled. Letting go of one person and gaining a country. You've profited, haven't you? His cold voice reverberated in the square. Gong Yimo looked at him blankly. She suddenly understood Gong Dai's intentions. He wanted to prove to her that these men were not worth her time. Everyone knew which to choose between a person and a country. But he, Gong Dai, was different. He was the kind of person who would give up a country for one person. Only he could do that. Longqing Wuji lost. If he was a person, he would be willing to give up a country and choose Gong Yimo. But he was King Lu Yi. His people were trembling in the corners of the square. So, he could not do that. At that moment, Longqing Wuji did not dare to look Gong Yimo in the eyes. He only looked at Gong Dai. Finally, he lowered his head in grief and indignation. He coldly made a gesture. Then, "Thank you, Prince Qi of Dai Yu State, for your help." These few words were said in a depressed, angry, and helpless tone. He never knew that he could be so emotional. Gong Ju's lips curved into a smile, and he nodded with satisfaction. No need to be so polite. Gong Yimo watched them come to an agreement. And was speechless. But she did not want to have any emotional entanglements with others, so she did not say anything. Seeing that Gong Dai and Longqing Wuji had formed an alliance was very disadvantageous for the Huazhou family. But a rebellion was a rebellion. Now that they were riding a tiger, they could not back down. It was better to fight. Coincidentally, he, Huazhou Jinyan, was also looking forward to a fight with Gong Dai. The people from both sides kept pouring into the square from two different directions and started to fight. Gong Yimo originally wanted to join in. But as soon as she drew her sword, Gong Dai frowned slightly. In the midst of the chaotic battle, he carried Gong Yimo up to the wooden house like a fragile porcelain doll. "This is a man's business. Royal sister, just watch." With that, he jumped down himself and joined in the fight, tangling with Huazhou Jinyan. Gong Yimo was still a little stunned when he put her up to the wooden house. Whether it was in her previous life or this life, she was used to charging and breaking through enemy lines. She was used to doing everything herself and fighting at the forefront. But Gong Dai's actions made her feel like she was being protected, as if she was powerless and only needed to watch. She did not know why, but this feeling was not bad. Below, there were sounds of fighting. The people in front had fallen, but there was still a steady stream of people pouring into the square. Gong Yimo looked at these people fighting and did not feel anything. After all, she had seen many of them. And many things were not as simple as they seemed on the surface. The root of the problem seemed simple, as if it could be solved just by sitting down and talking. But in reality, the reason for the current situation was because of hidden dangers that had been buried a long time ago. That was why there would be a day when it would explode. It was not just on the surface. She did not understand Lu Ye's situation, but the way the Huazhou family wanted to monopolize the horse ranch must have crossed Longqing Wuji's bottom line from the beginning. It was just that he had held back. And Longqing Wuji was already prepared. He had notified the Baiji family in advance to help. Clearly, the tripartite situation of the three big families had collapsed. From this point, it could be seen that the simple Lu Yi had a complicated side that was not inferior to the Dai Yu state. It was too noisy below. Gong Yimo turned to look at Huazhou Wuyo, who was still tied up on the duga. She touched her chin and said, "You did not die in vain. So many people will be buried with you," but at this moment, Huazhou Wuyo was not calm at all. She stared at the battle below anxiously. She did not have the calmness that Gong Yimo had. The smell of blood and the sounds of fighting were the most provocative. It could also make people nervous or excited. Huazhou Wuyo was very nervous. Her face was pale and her forehead was covered in cold sweat. "I don't want to die. I won't die. The warriors of the Huazhou family will not lose. I don't want to die. But as she said this, she saw with her own eyes that someone she knew from the Huazhou family was killed by the Baiji family. She could not help but scream. It was as if the knife was cutting her. Blood splattered 3 feet. Gong Yimo saw this and could almost feel the heat of the blood. In the past, she had been fighting in close combat. This was the most familiar feeling. But now, she was sitting here without any blood. She was not used to it. No, the Huazhou family will lose. Gong Yimo analyzed the situation coldly. Although the Huazhou family was very brave and had more people than the Baiji family and Longqing family, they had Gong Dai. Even if the people he trained were few, they would still have an overwhelming advantage at this moment. Not to mention the endless stream of people who came to protect them. Without the advantage of being caught off guard and having the advantage of numbers, the Huazhou family was destined to lose. At this moment, Huazhou Wuyo also looked at the place where Gong Dai and the others were. There was almost a vacuum there. Her eyes turned red and she was speechless for a long time. You are really lucky. After a while, Gong Yimo heard Huazhou Wuyo's voice. Gong Dai loves you so much and there are so many people protecting you. I still remember how Gong Dai forced the shop owner's family to be on guard in the middle of the night so that you could eat a sweet biscuit that you liked. Gong Yimo was stunned. She did not remember what Huazhou Wuyo was talking about. That incident was actually the first time Huazhou Wuyo was caught by Gong Dai. She was jealous of Gong Yimo. But, wasn't this jealousy also a form of envy? Huazhou Wuyo cried when she saw that the Huazhou family was gradually defeated. Her brother's bloodthirsty eyes could not save them. She suddenly regretted doing such a thing for her own selfish reasons. The Huazhou family's rebellion was premeditated by her father. But her brother's rebellion was really for her sake. Chapter 371. But now, seeing that the Huazhou family was on the verge of collapse, she could not say a word to persuade them. Actually, if she said one word, her brother would definitely listen to her. Surrendering was better than so many people dying. But she just could not say it. She was afraid of death. Longqing Wuji and the rest gradually gained control of the situation. Under the overwhelming advantage, many of the Huazhou family members surrendered. Huazhou Jinyan's thigh was cut and he could not stand up again. Longqing Wuji panted slightly, then sent a team to the Huazhou family to clean up the remnants. Looking at the corpses on the ground, Huazhou Wuyo could not help but burst into tears. She looked at Gong Yimo with hatred. This is all your fault. If not for you, I would still be a goddess. Perhaps I would have become a princess. Why did you do this to me? Sometimes, people were so strange. She did not think about what she had done or how many people she had killed. She only felt that she had been forced to this point by others. But was it really because others had forced her? It was her own choice. Gong Yimo jumped down from the firewood tower. At this moment, around the square, the weak clansmen were hiding in the corners, looking over. They watched as Gong Yimo took out a fire starter and looked calmly at Huazhou Wuyo. You should ask the king of hell this question. Huazhou Jinyan saw this and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. But because of his serious injuries, he could not move. He only had time to scream. Wuyo! But no matter how unwilling, sorrowful, and angry he was, the fire starter fell on the firewood that had been drenched in oil. It jumped and rolled down, but the flames immediately rose. Huazhou Wuyo screamed. There were so many dead people on the ground, and those kneeling on the ground. Not a single one of them came to save her. Gong Yimo! Gong Yimo, you will die a horrible death. She looked at all this in horror, screaming and cursing. The moment the heatwave hit, death approached. At that moment, she broke down. Gong Yimou glanced at her, then turned around and walked towards Hua Zhou Jinyan with a smile. Hua Zhou Jinyan's thigh had been cut and he could not move at all. He could only crawl towards the fire, shouting no continuously. Worryless. Worryless. Being burned to death was very painful. That kind of burning pain seemed to slowly burn one's soul. Gong Yimou picked up a bow and arrow, then stood in front of Hua Zhou Jinyan. He looked up blankly. Last time, he had almost killed this woman with an arrow, but it had only been a short time. This woman had grown to such a level. She held such a high position and wielded so much power that she could decide the outcome of a country. As for him, he was lying on the ground like a dog, looking up at him. Gong Yimou threw the bow in front of him. Pick it up. As she said this, Hua Zhou Wuyo's screams came from behind her. The fire had already reached her skirt. Her panicked and terrified voice deeply touched the nerves of everyone in the square. There was a burning smell in the air. She kept cursing Gong Yimou. It was all her fault. She did not want to die. She did not want to be burned to death. If you don't want to see your sister die so painfully, you have another choice. Pick up the bow and use your superb archery skills to give her a quick death. Gong Yimou looked at Hua Zhou Jinyan with a smile. At this moment, she was like a demon, but the corners of her lips curled up slightly. She was clearly demonic, but there was no evil in her at all. She wanted him to kill his sister? No, he could not. Hua Zhou Jinyan pushed the bow and arrow away, but Hua Zhou Wuyo's painful screams made him hesitate. He had to save her. Save her. Not kill her. Gong Yimou. You will die a horrible death. Ah, you will die a horrible death. Thousands of arrows will pierce your heart. You will be torn apart by 5 horses. Gong Yimou heard the curses behind her and the crackling of the firewood. She opened her eyes and revealed her white teeth. She made a gesture towards Hua Zhou Jinyan, which was to reach out and swipe her throat. She had done this gesture to Hua Zhou Jinyan when she had escaped from his arrow. As long as you can pierce her throat with 1 arrow, then she will die immediately. She will not have to suffer the pain of being burned by the fire. Also, as long as you don't miss, I promise you that I will bury her ashes in your Hua Zhou family's graveyard, and no one will care about it. As long as you shoot her throat. Hua Zhou Jinyan looked at Gong Yimou in disbelief. However, he did not see anything on Gong Yimou's face. She was taking revenge for the 2 arrows from back then. She was forcing him to kill the person that he would rather rebel to protect. The screams continued, and the fire made the entire place hot. No one spoke, and no one stopped her. She was just so unscrupulous as she asked him to do this. However, when she said these words, there was not a trace of cruelty in her expression. Instead, there was pity, as if she was forgiving. Wasn't that pity and forgiveness? Hua Zhou Wuyo's screams became more and more pitiful. The fire burned her skin, and she wished she could die immediately. Ah! Gong Yimou! I curse you, curse you! She cried and laughed, cursing like a crazy demon. Her painful screams finally made Hua Zhou Jinyan grab the bow and arrow. Gong Yimou saw that he had grabbed the bow and arrow. She smiled and moved aside, allowing him to see his sister's pitiful state. The fire burned Hua Zhou Jinyan's dress and burned her body. It could be said that she was begging for death. Hua Zhou Jinyan's hand that was holding the bow and arrow was trembling. He hated how these people could be so cruel. His sister was arrogant, noble, and beautiful. She should not be burned in the fire, forcing him to kill her personally to end the pain. Why was it that the one dying was not someone else? Gong Yimou saw the hatred in his eyes. Her ghostly voice instantly dispelled all of Hua Zhou thoughts. You have to think carefully. There's only one arrow. If you use it to shoot someone else, then you can watch Hua Zhou burn to death. It's that simple. Her words made Hua Zhou heart turn to ashes. He sat on the ground. On one side was his screaming sister, and on the other was the person he wanted to kill the most. At such a close distance, he could directly kill Longqing Wuji. Or kill Gong Yimou. But the fire had already burned Hua Zhou. If he killed these people, then Hua Zhou would welcome her most tragic death. Revenge. Or to give his sister relief. He had never felt that the bow in his hand was so heavy. He finally aimed at Hua Zhou's neck. At this moment, Hua Zhou was in extreme pain. Her resentful eyes entangled with Gong Yimou. Her eyes were bleeding. Every word was like the most vicious curse from the depths of hell. Gong Yimou. I use my life to curse you. You will be betrayed by the person you love the most. You will suffer the most extreme punishment in the world until you die. You will never be reincarnated. After saying this, her head suddenly tilted back. Her upper body was nailed to the wooden stake behind her by her own brother with an arrow. She died with her eyes wide open. But she no longer had to endure the pain of being burned by the fire. This was good, very good. Gong Yimou saw Hua Zhou's bow fall to the ground. His hands were trembling. She could not help but smile. This arrow had actually killed 2 people. Hua Zhou and himself. There would no longer be a master archer, Hua Zhou. She had avenged the 2 arrows from back then. Wasn't this all very convenient? Chapter 372. With Hua Zhou's death, this matter was settled. What Lu Yi did next had nothing to do with her. She could prepare to go back. However, Gong Dai refused to let her go. He insisted that she stay and go with him. In Gong Dai's eyes, the royal sister was too jumpy. He had to keep an eye on her. Gong Yimou stayed with resentment. She had no choice. She had to watch Longqing Tingshui get married. In order to appease the people, Longqing Wuji had to cut the Gordian knot and let Longqing Tingshui get married as soon as possible. Otherwise, once the matter was settled, Longqing Tingshui would have to suffer. Therefore, no matter how reluctant they were, the old Lu Yi king and the old Wang Fei were beaten by Longqing Wuji. They became well-behaved and began to prepare a dowry for Longqing Tingshui. Gong Yimou saw this and was happy in her heart. This was because she knew very well what kind of person Chop Wang was. He looked very honest and kind, but he was the only homosexual she knew in this world. This was something that her subordinates had told her as a joke. They said that the king of a small country didn't love beauties but loved men. It wasn't that he didn't abstain from meat and vegetables, but that he was only interested in men. Moreover, it was said that he was a virgin. If Longqing Tingshui married over, she would also be a widow. However, she wouldn't say these things out loud. More than 1,000 lives. Well, Gong Yimou wasn't just because of those people. Longqing Tingshui had disgusted her so many times. She deserved to be disgusted for the rest of her life. She thought mischievously. She rubbed her chin. Recently, she seemed to be a bit angry. Not good, not good. Therefore, in such a chaotic atmosphere, Longqing Tingshui got married. The Chopper King personally came to Lu Yi to pick her up. They were travel-worn and couldn't bring anything. Therefore, the old Lu Yi king and the old Wang Fei prepared a lot for them to take away. Therefore, it could be considered a grand wedding. Last time, Longqing Tingshui was harshly reprimanded by Longqing Wuji because of the Hua Zhou family. That was why she was very well behaved on the day of her wedding. Although others might think she was glamorous, only she knew how she felt on the inside. Gong Yimo also saw Chopper King. He was about 30 years old and looked ordinary. Naturally, he was not liked by the old Lu Yi, so the old Lu Yi pulled him aside and nagged at him. Rather than calling it advice, it was more like a warning. The pitiful man listened obediently and was lectured like a grandson. Gong Yimo secretly pulled Gong Dai's arm and whispered to him. "Look, that's the little show I told you about. You know what little show is, right? I've explained it to you before. Don't look down on him just because he's weak. He's completely under the control of the old Lu Yi King. Little show is very powerful. Just you wait, when Long Chang's Ting Shui arrives, she'll definitely be suppressed by little show. She won't be able to be arrogant." Gong Ju listened with a smile, but in his heart he felt strange. His sister seemed to know everything. What was the reason for this? The palace was very lively. After the banquet, Long Chang's Ting Shui was about to leave with Chopper King's people. If they were in Daiyu state, they would definitely be laughed at for leaving in such a hurry. When they left, everyone stood up and sent Long Chang's Ting Shui to the gates of Hua City. From today onwards, she was no longer Lu Ye's most favored little princess, but a princess of a small country. The difference in status was not ordinary. When Long Chang's Ting Shui left, she kept looking back, as if hoping that Long Chang's Wuji would change his mind. At the city gates, Long Chang's Ting Shui hugged the old princess and cried. Her reluctance to part was very moving. Long Chang's Wuji stood at the city gates and looked at them without saying anything. In any case, she was definitely getting married today. Perhaps only when she got married would Lu Yi be able to live peacefully for a few days. At this time, Gong Yimo was also on the city walls. There were only the two of them up there. Looking at the wedding procession below, they felt like they were putting the blame on others. Gong Yimo sighed and then stretched out her hand. In her palm was a silver medal with Long Chang's Wuji's name engraved on it. It was his life medal. Now that Hua Zhou's family has fallen, and Long Chang's Ting Shui, who has always disliked me, is also married, Lu Yi is still quite safe. I'll return this medal to you. She said it with a relaxed face. Long Chang's Wuji looked at the small medal in her palm but did not say anything. Take it. Gong Yimo slightly raised her eyebrows and giggled. Are you going to give it to me? That's not good, right? She pretended to be shy. Only then did Long Chang's Wuji smile and take the medal from her hand. But before Gong Yimo could say anything, he used his height advantage and hung the life medal around her neck. This made Gong Yimo stunned. What are you doing? Gong Yimo asked in confusion. This was Lu Ye's life medal, which represented the king. Why would he give it to her? Long Chang's Wuji looked at her and said in a low voice, This life medal represents me, Long Chang's Wuji. Rather than one day, it will sink into the sacred lake and never see the light of day. I'd rather it be hung around your neck and buried with you. Gong Yimo laughed when she heard this. What if I want to be cremated? Wouldn't the only evidence of your existence in this world be cremated with me? Who knew that Long Chang's Wuji actually looked at her seriously? How fortunate is it to be fused with life and death? The afternoon sun shone on Long Chang Wuji's face. His expression was firm and sincere, just like the sun, unswervingly shining wherever it was. It was also like the huge yellow stone city gate beneath them, eternally steady. He was the king of Lu Yi. He had no selfish motives, but he also had selfish motives. Even though he promised Gong Dai that he would no longer peek at Gong Yimo's thoughts, he still hoped that this thing that represented him could always be by her side. Gong Yimo smiled faintly. She took down the life medal, stood on her tiptoes and gently hung it around Long Chang's neck. Back then, she had used a finger to take it away so frivolously. Now, she was giving it back so solemnly. I'm very happy that you think so highly of me, but I can't do this. This life medal belongs to your princess, and more importantly, it belongs to the sacred lake. Your roots are here, you are here, your heart should also be here. It should not follow me to a foreign place. Long Cheng's Wuji's eyes flashed with a trace of pain. Even this little bit of thought is not allowed. Gong Yimo smiled. Do you still remember what you said? You said, you want to make a contribution, live in people's hearts, verbally, and pass it down for generations. And I can also live in your sea of consciousness. What difference does it make whether I have this life medal or not? At this moment, a burst of music sounded. Long Cheng's Ting Shui was about to leave. The bridal procession on both sides blew the horn, and then played the four-stringed instrument to send the bride off. The sound of the four-stringed instrument was very pleasant and melodious, with a simple and mysterious aura of the grassland. Gong Yimo was immediately entranced, and murmured. Your country is a very outstanding country, and its people are also outstanding people. It should be like this four-stringed instrument, and continue to develop endlessly. And you are the one who will open the new door, their leader and spiritual pillar. Her expression gradually became serious. You are very important. Just as you said, you are Lu Ye's king. You don't belong to yourself, but you belong to them. Don't you think it's very meaningful? To be able to bear the will of so many people, to create an immortal foundation. What a delightful and fulfilling thing. Long Cheng's Wuji suddenly laughed. That laughter was very hearty, and also very happy. Finally, he stopped laughing, and looked at the people who followed him under the city gate, and said softly. Yes, I belong to Lu Yi, and I am happy for it. I have a lot, but... He looked at Gong Yimo's side profile, but I can't have you. Chapter 373. By the time Lu Ye's matters were all settled, it was already more than 10 days later. Gong Dai and Yuheng's envoy sat down to discuss the Three Kingdoms horse farms. Because Lu Yi was willing to provide the horses of these 18 horse farms, this matter went very smoothly. Gong Dai also made a request. He was willing to send people to clear the road across the Three Kingdoms, but he hoped that all the relay stations of these 18 horse farms would belong to Gong Yimo. Lu Yi had already agreed, so naturally, he had no objections. When Yuheng's people heard that it was for the princess, they happily agreed. This matter was considered a preliminary agreement. As for the laws and regulations, they still needed to go through further negotiations. However, this first meeting was done and sealed. After these matters were settled, it was time to go back. Gong Yimo was preparing her luggage when the door rang. It turned out that Yuheng's envoy was requesting an audience. Gong Yimo had seen this person before. Greetings to your highness. Gong Yimo smiled very amiably. What business do you have with me? That person quickly explained, the second prince has a message for you. His Highness said that he wants to thank the princess for helping him when he was passing by Yuheng last year. It was because of this that he was not so passive. However, His Highness is currently busy with the coronation, so it is inconvenient for him to personally thank you. He hopes that when you pass by Yuheng on your way back, you can attend His Highness's coronation ceremony. Gong Yimo smiled. It's finally time for the coronation. Why did it take so long? That person replied, when His Highness returned to the country, there were still some remnants causing trouble, such as an of Scylla. They caused trouble because of His Highness's background, so it took some effort to eliminate them. Gong Yimo nodded. I see. I will definitely attend Kim Yoon Gij's coronation ceremony. Please pass on a message that I will definitely be there. That person's face was full of smiles. Then this foreign subject will not disturb you. I believe that His Highness will be very happy with this news. Gong Yimo smiled. Go ahead. After they left, Gong Yimo sighed. This yuheng was finally done. Lu Yi also seemed to have a lot of things to do. However, since there was nothing for her to do, it was time to leave. On the day of his departure, everyone in Huaqing came to see him off. Last time, they had wronged Gong Yimo and felt very embarrassed. She was a person from Daiyu State, and she had put in so much effort to help them solve their grain problem. However, they still doubted her and almost caused her to die under the blade of their king. Gong Yimo did not take it to heart. The situation at that time was very normal. Anyway, the main culprit was dead, so she would not bother about it. Gong Dai was even more direct. After bidding farewell to the palace, he quickly left, as if he did not want to stay in Hua City for another second. Therefore, the group of people left Hua City under the escort of the people. Dragon City's Wuji did not come out to see them off. This was good, as it would save them from being sad when they parted. After leaving Hua City, Gong Yimo felt her body lighten. She looked at Gong Dai and said with a smile, Gong Dai, does Imperial Father know that you brought so many soldiers with you? Gong Dai said lightly, they are not soldiers from the Imperial City. Seeing that Gong Yimo did not understand, he pursed his lips and smiled. After leaving Lu Ye's Hua City, he was in a good mood and smiled more often. They are soldiers from the West Province. Back then, Imperial Father gave me 30,000 soldiers in the West Province. They are private soldiers that I secretly trained. Gong Yimo was slightly speechless. Gong Dai was really daring. Even if the military power was in Gong Dai's hands, this kind of private mobilization of soldiers was a big crime. So they will return to the West Province directly from Lu Yi. Gong Dai nodded, when the time comes, there will only be 100 or so people returning to Daiyu State with us. Gong Yimo could not help but admire Gong Dai's foresight. Fortunately, he had mobilized the soldiers, which saved them a lot of trouble. At this time, it was the time when everything in Lu Yi was growing. The grass was green and the breeze was refreshing. At this time, a melodious sound suddenly came. Gong Yimo listened and saw that it was the sound of a piccolo, who was playing a farewell song on her way to leave. Gong Yimo turned around and saw Dragon City's Wuji. He was riding alone on a horse and playing the flute. In her previous life and this life, she did not know that Dragon City's Wuji could play the flute, and played it so well. However, Gong Dai was not happy. He looked at Dragon City's Wuji. Is King Lu Yi here to send us off? Dragon City's Wuji looked at him openly. I will keep my promise, but there are a few words that I want to say only to Gong Yimo. Gong Dai narrowed his eyes and looked at him. There was a trace of impatience on his handsome face, but when he looked at Gong Yimo, it turned into a sigh. He led his men and urged their horses forward a few steps so that the two of them could have some space to speak. It was not that he was gentlemanly, but he knew that the royal sister did not like to be tied down. Moreover, the royal sister had a good heart and Dragon City's Wuji was a man who kept his promises. Although he felt that it was troublesome, he still gave him a chance. Perhaps, this would be the last time Dragon City's Wuji would see the royal sister. Dragon City's Wuji had the same thought. This might be the last time he would see Gong Yimo. No matter how powerful a woman was, she would still get married. Once she got married, she would no longer be able to fly around like an eagle. Therefore, he let himself be. For the first time, he looked at Gong Yimo in a daze, as if he wanted to imprint her appearance deeply in his mind. No matter how harsh the years were, it would not be able to erase her appearance. Mor. He smiled. This was also the first time he called her that. It was 3 parts careful and 7 parts painful. He had nothing to say. He picked up his flute again and played a farewell song. It was said that a song could touch a person's heart. The lingering feelings, happiness, pain and sorrow of parting seemed to be expressed through this song. Gong Yimo sighed softly. Parting was something that was hard to get used to no matter how many times she experienced it. But the song had to end, and people had to part. When the last note fell, Dragon City's Wuji urged his horse forward. The moment the two horses drew close, he reached out his hand towards her and cut off a strand of her hair. Gong Yimo was stunned. She asked, "What are you doing?" At this moment, Dragon City's Wuji had already placed the strand of hair back into his arms. Looking at her, those beautiful deep blue eyes were filled with tenderness and forbearance. "The divine ancestor has already promised me that I can use your hair to make a life tablet." Gong Yimo was puzzled. Didn't they say that only fetal hair could be used? Why was it possible to use strand of hair now? But this was not the main point. She asked blankly, "What do you want my life tablet for?" She blinked her eyes in confusion. Her small face was smooth and her eyes were clear. No matter how many times he looked at them, Dragon City's Wuji felt that her eyes were wider than the sky and cleaner than the sacred lake. He sighed softly. "I will link your life card with my life card. Because, even if I create an immortal foundation, I will still grow old and die. My life tablet will still sink into the sacred lake. And when that day comes, I only hope that the name that will be entangled with my life tablet and sink into the lake together, will be you." He took a deep breath and laughed towards the sky. "It is already impossible in this life. Perhaps this way, I can look forward to being entangled with you in the next life." This affection was heavy. At that moment, Gong Yimo felt as if she could not breathe. Dragon City's Wuji looked at her greedily. Perhaps, this would be the last time in his life that he could chase after what he wanted. The last time that he could follow his heart. In the end, he, the strongest man in the grasslands, the bravest eagle's son, actually choked up slightly in front of her. "At this moment, I actually feel that, being remembered by the world cannot be compared to you remembering me." He smiled. The bitterness in his smile did not suit him at all. "Take care. No matter if we meet again or not, please do not forget Lu Yi and I." Dragon City's Wuji. Gong Yimo lowered her head and said softly, "I will not forget you. Goodbye." After saying that, she did not dare to look at him again. She urged her horse and left, leaving behind a back view on the grasslands. The sun shone brightly that day. It was actually so dazzling. Chapter 374. Tomorrow would be Gong Yimo's 18th birthday. Gong Dai watched as Gong Yimo half knelt on the grass to wash her face. The gurgling water was very shallow and very clear. Under the sunlight, the sparkling water splashed and sparkled. It was a different kind of seductive sight. At this time, Gong Dai's private army had already taken another route from Luyi back to Shizhou. There were only about 100 of them walking on the grassland. It would probably take another 2 or 3 days before they could leave Luyi. This made Gong Dai feel a little troubled. How could he celebrate Royal Sister's birthday in this place where there were no villages or shops? Gong Dai grew up under the influence of Gong Yimo. Naturally, he also understood that it was different from what his teachers taught him. There were many men who got married at the age of 12. However, in Royal Sister's mind, it seemed that one would only be considered an adult at the age of 18. Gong Dai calculated. He would be 18 in half a year, so he would be considered an adult, right? However, he had prepared a birthday gift, and Royal Sister would definitely like it. At night, a group of people began to set up camp. Unlike winter, although Lu Yi also had a Kong bed, the thing that they used to make fires was very special. It burned animal feces for warmth. Although it made the best use of everything, it also made the house smell very strange. Fortunately, the palace did not have such a smell. It had to be said that whether it was Lu Yi or Yuheng, they were all trying their best to become Chinese. Perhaps one day in the future, someone would unify the 4 countries. Gong Yimo smiled. However, if one wanted to unify the 4 countries, it was usually through war. She probably would not be able to see it in her lifetime. The sky darkened. The stars on the grassland lit up one by one. There was still a trace of orange and purple on the horizon that had not faded. There were already stars above her head. Gong Yimo lay on the grass with her arms and legs spread out. It was really comfortable to lie like this after eating. Gong Dai sat beside her. In the end, he couldn't dissuade Gong Yimo and lay down as well. The 100-odd Imperial Army soldiers were definitely doing what they were supposed to do. They didn't even dare to look over here. Furthermore, the grass was a little tall. From the angle where they were lying down and setting up camp, they really couldn't see what they were doing. Gong Yimo chuckled when she saw Gong Dai's uneasiness. Ever since he was young, Gong Dai loved cleanliness. Lying on the ground like this was actually a very difficult thing for him, right? Don't you think it's cool and comfortable? Gong Dai turned his head and saw Gong Yimo snickering. It had been like this since they were young. As long as he felt uncomfortable, the royal sister would be happy. Thinking of this, his handsome face became even more helpless. Looking into his eyes, there was an indescribable doting. The light from the fire shone from afar. Their vision wasn't very clear, but they were very close. Their breaths were almost intertwined. Gong Emo used the starlight and firelight to look at him. She only felt that in such a blurry state, Gong Ju's sharp aura had diminished a lot. He looked more handsome and his coldness retreated, making him appear very gentle. What's wrong? Being stared at by Gong Yimo like this, he was actually a little embarrassed. That special voice came out from his thin lips. Hearing it in this kind of night, it was especially seductive. Gong Yimo smiled but didn't say anything. The more she looked at Gong Dai, the more she felt that he was very good now. Beautiful eyes, a high nose, and thin but stylish lips. But the knot in her heart couldn't be untied. Thinking about it, Gong Dai was quite wronged. He actually had to pay for something he didn't do in this life. But, who asked the person she met in both lives to be Gong Dai? Feeling Gong Dai holding her hand and asking again, Gong Yimo smiled and said, I read a little fable when I was young. Do you want to hear it? Gong Dai was stunned. Then, he moved closer to her, indicating that he was willing to listen. When he was young, Gong Yimo would always teach him some principles through stories she read in books. Even if she didn't have any experience, who would say that she didn't do well? Gong Yimo thought for a while and said, there was a woman who wanted to jump into a river. Then, a boatman saw her and hurriedly rowed the boat over to ask for the reason. The woman said that she came here on a boat 3 years ago. She married a good man and thought that she would live a happy life. In the end, she found out that she was used by her husband. After being used, she was persecuted by his concubine and was abandoned. In a short 3 years, she had nothing. In grief, she wanted to end her life. When Gong Yimo said this, she spoke very slowly. Her eyes were staring blankly at the sky. The emotions in her eyes made the sensitive Gong Dai frown slightly. He suddenly felt that what she was going to say was very important to him. Gong Yimo continued, after the boatman heard this, he didn't say a word. He only let the woman get on the boat. He took the woman around the lake and sent her ashore. The woman didn't understand. The boatman smiled and said, now you have returned to 3 years ago when you first came here. You also have nothing. But if you continue to live, you will have a lot. This was originally an inspiring prophecy. The meaning of its spread was to guide people to let go of their pain and find happiness. For some reason, when Gong Yimo finished this story, her expression was slightly perplexed. Then, she asked, "The story ends here. But what do you think will happen to the woman after she is sent back?" Gong Dai's heart suddenly trembled. He suddenly felt that this story was very likely to be the deepest knot in Royal Sister's heart. But why? Gong Dai was deep in thought. Gong Yimo said again. "Do you think she will listen to the old man and let go of everything? Nothing happened back then and start anew? Or will she wait for the old man to leave and continue to seek death?" If it was in the past, Gong Dai would definitely say that the woman would die. Because many things, many happiness, after obtaining them, were bloody exposed and told that it was all an illusion. The truth was that she was used and then abandoned. How could that kind of pain be erased with just a few words? After all, the deeper the love, the deeper the hatred. Not to mention other things, even if the woman really returned to 3 years ago, it was still a question whether her scarred heart could hold on. So, he felt that the woman would definitely die. If she could get over it so easily, she wouldn't have appeared by the lake to seek death. But why would Royal Sister suddenly ask this question? What if the woman was Royal Sister? A strong person like her would definitely not seek death. But how would she continue to live? A faint light flashed in his mind. But before he could grasp it, Gong Yimo shook his hand and asked. "You haven't answered me." Looking at the beautiful face in front of him, Gong Dai unexpectedly said, "Since there is a chance to start anew, then it must be anew." Maybe the boatman was really a deity and allowed her to return to 3 years ago. Gong Yimo heard this and thought for a while. She suddenly turned around and leaned closer to him. She looked seriously into Gong Dai's eyes and finally said, "Gong Dai, you're lying to me." Chapter 375. Her words made Gong Dai suddenly shocked. Because he suddenly felt that Gong Yimo was a bit off. Before he could figure out what was wrong, Gong Yimo had already said it. "With my understanding of you, your judgment should be that she will die." He couldn't say what he felt, but he felt that Gong Yimo's expression was indescribable and her tone was faint. "Then let's change the question. Do you think that if this woman was really sent back to 3 years ago by the boatman and she didn't seek death, then would she take revenge on her husband and concubine who harmed her, or would she live her own life and never interact with them again?" Her aggressive question actually made Gong Dai slightly frown. Gong Dai put himself in her shoes and thought that if it was him, even if those people didn't provoke him, he would still make the first move. He was this tyrannical and unreasonable. He only wanted to vent the anger in his heart. But why did Royal Sister ask him this? He thought of something and his back suddenly broke out in cold sweat. The warmth of the night was completely destroyed by Gong Yimo's words. His brows were tightly knit and he didn't know how to answer. Let go of the hatred and never interact with them again. This answer didn't seem like something he would say, but seeing Gong Yimo's face so close, he softly said it. "Since it hasn't happened, then let's just treat it as a nightmare. There's no need to take revenge and break off relations, right?" Gong Dai himself felt that he was lying, let alone Gong Yimo who was listening. She softly nestled in his embrace and smiled. Her slender fingers grabbed his chest and her head gently rubbed against his chin. They were so close right now, but Gong Dai felt a strange sense of danger, so he didn't speak easily. "Gong Dai." She seemed to laugh until tears came out. Her large eyes looked up and sparkling tears filled them. "You're lying to me again." Her expression suddenly changed and became dangerous. And at this time, Gong Dai, who felt uneasy, lowered his head and kissed her lips. He was so anxious, as if this was the only way he could feel her real existence. They kissed deeply for a long time until Gong Yimo's inexplicable hostility subsided. Only then did he let go of her. Gong Yimo looked at him in confusion. She didn't seem to understand why the two of them kissed. Seeing her like this, Gong Dai heaved a sigh of relief and said seriously, "I'm not lying to you. If your assumption is true and I'm the one who suffered all this, I won't lie to you. I'll kill all of them. Even if they don't have the time to hurt me, I won't give them the chance. But if the target is you, and you're the one who was persecuted, and I'm the ignorant one who hurt you, then I sincerely hope that you can give me, the blind one who hurt you, a chance. Don't blame me for something that hasn't happened, because I will never hurt you again." He lowered his head and grabbed Gong Yimo's hand in a panic. "Perhaps people have many reincarnations. Although I don't believe in this, but if I hurt you in one life, or even killed you in another life, but in this life, I only want to be good to you. I can't guarantee my past lives, but in this life, I can guarantee it. So I'm not lying to you." Gong Yimo blinked and digested his words with difficulty. At the same time, she was a little annoyed at herself for suddenly saying such things. Gong Dai was so smart. What if he really guessed something? Recently, she always felt that the hostility in her heart was getting stronger and stronger, but she didn't know why. And she was right. Gong Dai really guessed it. In his heart, a bold and wonderful idea suddenly sprouted. Because in his heart, Gong Yimo had always been a godlike existence. Since she had such a miraculous space, why couldn't she peek into the past and present lives? Why did she ask such a question? It had to be said that Gong Dai was really very smart, and his imagination was rich. His guesses were infinitely close to the truth. He suddenly hugged Gong Yimo, who was in deep thought, in his arms. He really felt her existence. He sighed and reached out to touch her hair. Her hair was very soft and fragrant. It made people want to kiss her. "No matter what, you can't leave my world," he said. Even if his assumption was true, and Gong Yimo really could peek into the past and present lives, she came to his side for a special reason, and then left him because of the previous life. Then he would really be wronged. He said firmly, "Even if you want to punish me, you have to stay by my side to punish me. You can't leave." Gong Yimo felt a little strange being hugged by him like this. But the affection in his voice was so serious that she couldn't refuse. At this time, Gong Yimo suddenly thought of something. She patted Gong Dai twice and then took something from her waist. Her expression was a little strange. This seemingly ordinary stone had not emitted any light after the first time. However, when she thought of the strange things that had happened to her during this period of time, she suddenly felt that, could it be that this thing was causing trouble? After all, it was regarded as a sacred stone by the Snow Clan. It shouldn't be just a symbol of status, right? The first time she touched this stone, she felt a little dizzy. This stone should have some hidden radiation. Gong Dai suddenly saw this stone and felt a little strange. But he felt that this stone seemed to have an inexplicable attraction to him. He couldn't help but reach out to touch it. At that moment, there seemed to be something in his mind, and he felt dizzy. Gong Yimo didn't have time to say anything. She saw him frowning and quickly asked him, "What's wrong?" In a daze, he heard Gong Yimo's voice. He felt his brain heat up. Before he could react, his body was already on top of Gong Yimo. Feeling the heat in his heart, he suddenly felt a little strange and asked, "What's wrong with me?" It was as if his suppressed subconscious was suddenly released. His body moved faster than his mind. Gong Yimo was also shocked. Then she looked at the stone in her hand. She suddenly had an idea. Did this stone contain some kind of radiation that could temporarily affect people's minds? But she had worn it for so long and felt that it didn't affect her much. So she boldly thought that it might have something to do with the will of the person who touched it. The weaker the will, the easier it was to be affected. It seemed that she had to find someone to test it. She immediately did as she thought, but Gong Dai was already on top of her. How could she bear to go down? At this time, the grass was covering them. No one could see what they were doing. Gong Dai, go down. I want to do an experiment. Wait. He suddenly smiled. His handsome face looked even more soul-stirring under the light of the fire. There's no hurry. Royal sister, you're almost an adult. He lowered his head. Their hair and breath intertwined. When you're an adult, you're no longer a child. Gong Yimo crossed her arms and asked cautiously, what are you doing? Chapter 376. Gong Dai smiled and blinked as he asked her. His tone sounded like he was acting coquettishly. Royal sister, when do you plan to give yourself to me? Gong Yimo was stunned. She hadn't even agreed to be with Gong Dai yet, and this guy was already thinking about things that were inappropriate for children. But she really wanted it. Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo with infatuation. For so many years, he had been thinking about how to devour Royal Sister every day. His heart ached from thinking about it. You wish. Gong Yimo said angrily. Her face flushed red, and she didn't know why, but she suddenly remembered the time when she was being treated like this on horseback, and her face turned even redder. Gong Dai, this guy, couldn't be thinking of using the ground as his bed and the sky as his blanket to do something, right? In reality, she was overthinking. How could Gong Dai treat her so casually? Royal sister, close your eyes. Why would Gong Yimo listen to him? Her eyes were wide open. Gong Dai laughed inwardly. If you don't close your eyes and continue to look at me like this, I won't be able to control myself. When Gong Yimo heard this, she really did close her eyes tightly. Gong Dai laughed inwardly as he looked at her. His body couldn't hold it in anymore, but it didn't matter. He could endure it. After all, Royal Sister was his. She couldn't run away. He lowered his head and kissed her eyes. Then, following her eyes downwards, he kissed the tip of her nose and then her lips. The wind gently blew the grass, revealing Gong Dai's slightly raised back. If the people at the campsite saw this, they might think that they were doing something. Gong Yimo panicked. She hugged Gong Dai's back and pressed it against his. The two of them were instantly intimate. Even Gong Dai widened his eyes and looked at her in surprise. His gaze instantly turned fiery. She really wasn't inviting him. Gong Yimo felt like crying. Gong Dai lowered his head and chuckled in her ear. Royal sister, this is the first time you've taken the initiative. As he spoke, he kissed her earlobe sincerely. It was soft and ticklish. At that moment, Gong Yimo could not help but let out a soft moan. In the next second, she wished she could bite off her own tongue. Needless to say, Gong Dai was so aroused by her soft voice that he almost couldn't control himself. He almost wanted to eat her alive. Gong Yimo wished she could find a hole to hide in. She was too ashamed to continue living. Fortunately, the two of them restrained themselves. Gong Yimo hadn't let go of the knot in her heart, but after resisting for a while, she actually let him go. As for Gong Dai, he didn't want to take her so casually. However, he didn't hold back on kissing or hugging her. That kind of careful touch made both of their souls tremble. It was exciting and made them want more. From time to time, they would whisper sweet nothings and talk about the past and the future. Time passed very quickly. In the end, as the two of them kissed, a faint ray of light rose from the horizon and shone through the gaps between their overlapping bodies. A night had passed just like that. As Gong Dai kissed her, he himself was a little out of breath. As for Gong Yimo, needless to say, she had already turned into spring water and closed her eyes like a cat. Her sweet appearance made Gong Dai unable to get enough of kissing her. They kissed, and their lips were a little red and swollen. "Royal sister," he said hoarsely. He shouted hoarsely, but Gong Yimo's weak response almost melted his whole body. The gentleness in his eyes was more than sweetness. Because Gong Yimo was so obedient, it was a direct reflection of her inner heart. She treated him differently, very differently. He gently traced Gong Yimo's eyes with his fingers. They were moist, like a flower waiting to be plucked, as delicate as its first blooming. "In my life, the luckiest and happiest thing was to meet you." He said these words in such a serious manner in the morning, and after a night of entanglement, it would be a lie to say that she wasn't moved. Gong Yimo even felt her heart itch. At that moment, she couldn't wait to tell him the secret of her birth so that he wouldn't feel so pressured. But just as she was thinking about whether she should tell him, she felt a chill on her chest. Gong Dai, was he finally willing to tear off her clothes? Wait a minute. Why did she use the word finally? But soon, she felt that she was dirty, because Gong Dai only put something under her outer clothes, and in the end, fastened it on Gong Yimo's chest. Gong Yimo looked down and saw that it was a soft armor similar to a tube top. Furthermore, it looked extremely unfamiliar. He had never seen such an armor before. Gong Dai's face was a little red, because he accidentally touched Gong Yimo's chest. After being intimate for so long, he had actually been very obedient except for kissing and hugging. Today, because of this special reason, he touched where he shouldn't have touched, and it made his face red and his heart beat for a while. "This is the chainmail I personally made for you. It's specially made to protect your heart, royal sister. You're always causing trouble, only this way can I feel a little more at ease." He used sky silk and meteoric copper wire as the raw materials. Not only were they rare, but they were also very tough and light, as if they were weightless. It only wrapped around the chest, and it didn't cause much of a feeling of restraint. In order to make this, he didn't know how many raw materials he had used, and it was all burning money. It made Lo Chi, this expressionless subordinate, feel a little pained, but in the end, it was a good thing, and Gong Dai was still quite satisfied. Gong Yimo looked at him carefully putting on her outer clothes, and suddenly felt like crying. It was as if she had originally thought that Gong Dai was the big bad wolf, but suddenly became a little white rabbit. So the person who hugged her and didn't let go last night was someone else. "This is your birthday present for me." Gong Yimo touched her chest. Gong Dai sat up and turned his head away. "You don't like it?" Gong Yimo smiled. "No. I like it very much." As she said that, she leaned forward and kissed Gong Dai on the cheek. This time, both of them were stunned. Gong Yimo was at a loss. Had she unknowingly developed a habit of doing this? With this thought, she didn't dare to look at Gong Dai, and quickly ran away. She still wanted to study that strange stone. Perhaps there would be a surprise. Although dawn had broken, the sky was still dark. There were only patrolling Imperial guards in the camp. When they saw Gong Yimo return, their expressions didn't change, and they just saluted her. This made Gong Yimo feel even more awkward. She felt that their gazes were hinting at something. After all, they had been lying in the grass for the whole night. Scary. How could she let Gong Dai do whatever he wanted to her so easily? Fortunately, Gong Dai was a strict commander, and they didn't say anything. When they were on the road during the day, their expressions were very serious. Gong Yimo sat on the horse and played with the black stone. This stone might be something like a meteorite, so it had some special effects. Moreover, every time she touched it, she would feel a tremor in her soul. No wonder it was called a sacred stone. She didn't know why, but she felt that this stone was actually related to her. That faint connection was not clear in the past, but now it was very clear. It made her a little puzzled. Chapter 377. In Yuheng Kingdom. Kim Yoon's ascension to the throne was basically what everyone expected, especially now that all the opponents had been eliminated, so the entire Yuheng Kingdom was very lively, showing that it was thriving. Tomorrow was the ascension ceremony, and most of the guests had arrived, but Kim Yoon had been waiting for Gong Yimo, so when he saw that there was still no news from her, he couldn't help but feel a little anxious. He even wondered if he should change the date. At this moment, the sound of porcelain shattering woke Kim Yoon up. He looked helplessly at his mother, Yoon Jin, who was now the Empress Dowager, and sighed. "Mother, it's only 3 years of fasting. This is already the lightest punishment, why are you still angry?" Yoon Jin killed Jin Xing with her own hands. Even if Gong Yimo forced her to do so, no one knew Gong Yimo, only Yoon Jin, so she was bound to be charged with murdering her husband. When Kim Yoon came back, and Silla used this point to criticize him in order to rise to the throne. He said that Yoon Jin killed her husband because she felt guilty, because Kim Yoon wasn't the emperor's child. Now, although Silla and the others had been defeated, Kim Yoon became the emperor, and Yoon Jin became the Empress Dowager. Those old fogies in the court still couldn't agree with Yoon Jin's way of doing things. They thought that Yoon Jin should be fasting for the late emperor and worship Buddha for the rest of her life. It was Kim Yoon who insisted that Yoon Jin be allowed to stay in the imperial mausoleum for 3 years. Otherwise, it would be immoral and unworthy of being the Empress Dowager. Yoon Jin didn't want to do that. Now that her son was the emperor, it was her time to shine. Why did she have to abstain from fasting? Why did she have to stay in the imperial mausoleum? Just to get the approval of those old fogies in the court. So what if she didn't go? Besides, she wasn't the only one who killed Jin Xing back then. Why did they come looking for trouble with her? Wasn't it because they were afraid of Gong Yimo and thought that she was easy to bully? "I won't go." Yoon Jin's attitude was firm. "No." Kim Yoon shook his head. "After the coronation, I will send you there." "Mother, please don't make things difficult for me." In fact, the reason why Kim Yoon was so determined to send Yoon Jin away was not because he felt guilty towards Jin Xing, nor was it to shut the mouths of those old officials. It was because Yoon Jin had been too absurd in the past half year. She seemed to have spent all her energy on men and was unable to resist those handsome and gentle men. In the past, she had only done it secretly, but now she was doing it openly. Although outsiders didn't know about this, Kim Yoon knew that he couldn't hide the truth. So he wanted to send Yoon Jin away before the matter got out of hand. Then he could get rid of those men and kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Seeing that Kim Yoon was so determined and that he was indifferent to her for so long, Yoon Jin gritted her teeth and had no choice but to tell him the real reason. "I can't go to the imperial mausoleum." Her voice became softer and softer as she looked at her lower abdomen, revealing a troubled expression. "Because I have a child." This was simply a bolt from the blue. Jin Xing had only been dead for half a year and she was actually pregnant. Kim Yoon turned pale with fright. He stood up from his seat with a bang. He looked left and right. Fortunately, everyone had been dismissed. Otherwise, he would have to silence her with murder for this kind of scandal. Yoon Jin saw that Kim Yoon was staring at her with wide eyes. It seemed to be the first time he was so surprised and fierce. He stared at her as if he couldn't wait to give her a beating. Kim Yoon took a deep breath. "Imperial Mother. Do you know what you're doing?" Yoon Jin was stunned by the roar. She wasn't very sure herself, but her period had always been punctual. It was already 10 days late, so it seemed that it couldn't be wrong. Because Kim Yoon had been busy with the ascension of the throne, this matter had been kept secret for so long. Seeing that she didn't speak, Kim Yoon's gloomy gaze fell on Yoonjin's lower abdomen. He squeezed out 2 words from between his teeth. Whose? Yoonjin shrunk her neck. It's Wang Jing. Kim Yoon closed his eyes. Damn you, Wang Jing. That overwhelming hatred couldn't be suppressed. At this moment, his confidant walked over. As if he didn't see the stalemate between mother and son, he happily whispered something into Kim Yoon's ear. Your Highness, Dayu State's Princess Gu Gua and Dayu State's Prince Chi have arrived. Should we immediately announce their arrival? Kim Yoon's eyes lit up, then he glared fiercely at Yoonjin. See them. But before he left, he ordered people to surround the entire Empress Dowager's palace. No one was allowed to enter. Only then did he go to the main hall to receive the guests. They hadn't seen each other for more than half a year. But he almost forgot that Gong Yimo, she didn't come alone, therefore, when Kim Yoon saw Gong Dai, his expression couldn't turn around for a moment. However, Gong Dai didn't look at him. The two of them exchanged glances and then looked away. Gong Yimo called out, Kim Yoon Gij. Her voice was clear and filled with joy. They hadn't seen each other for more than half a year. At the age of 18, she was like a flower bud that had just bloomed. With just one look, Kim Yoon couldn't take his eyes off her. Kim Yoon was also a beautiful person. Now, his nobility had deepened. He couldn't be mentioned in the same breath as he was in the past. When Gong Yimo saw him, her greeting strangely turned into a compliment. After not seeing each other for half a year, Kim Yoon Gij has become even more magnificent. Kim Yoon was rather uncomfortable. This was what he wanted to say but didn't dare to say. He didn't expect to say it first. On the other hand, Gong Dai was unhappy when he heard this. Although royal sister didn't mean anything other than a compliment, he didn't look bad either. Why didn't royal sister praise him like this when they met? Kim Yoon glanced at Gong Dai intentionally or unintentionally. Then, he focused on chatting with Gong Yimo. However, after reminiscing about the past, Kim Yoon couldn't help but let out a long sigh and asked Gong Yimo to ask. What's wrong? Kim Yoon shook his head. If it was just Gong Yimo, he might have said it directly. However, there was also Gong Dai. He didn't want his love rival to laugh at him. However, Gong Yimo was very smart. She guessed it almost immediately. But your mother. Kim Yoon nodded. Gong Yimo thought so too. Now that Kim Yoon had great power in Yuheng, there was almost nothing to worry about. The only thing that could trouble him was Yoonjin. However, what did Yoonjin have that could trouble him? She suddenly thought of the time when she left Yuheng for Lu Yi. In the end, Yoonjin was crying in Wang Jing's arms. She suddenly had a strange association and said it out loud. She can't be. Gong Yimo's gaze fell on Kim Yoon's abdomen. This suggestive gaze made Kim Yoon's face turn red. Finally, he nodded. It was true. Gong Yimo was stunned. She didn't expect Yoonjin to be so bold. Jin Sheng had only been dead for half a year, right? She probably couldn't die in peace now. On the other hand, Gong Dai didn't understand because Gong Yimo was facing him sideways. He couldn't see Gong Yimo's gaze. However, seeing that the two of them didn't say anything and could communicate with just a glance, Gong Dai felt more and more unhappy. He felt that Kim Yoon had unknowingly snatched away his exclusive. Chapter 378. Kim Yoon chatted with Gong Yimo for a while and then went to work. When Gong Yimo and Gong Dai were about to rest, Yoonjin came to invite them. Kim Yoon didn't want to let Yoonjin meet anyone, but when he thought that it was Gong Yimo, he was relieved and agreed to let them meet. Gong Dai didn't have a good impression of the Empress Dowager of Yuhing, so he wanted to accompany Gong Yimo. The person who came to invite them had no choice but to invite two people. It was also the first time that Yoonjin saw Gong Dai. Yoonjin had no immunity to good-looking people. Unfortunately, she didn't find anyone who was as good-looking as her son after searching for so long. It made her proud and helpless. So when she saw Gong Dai for the first time, she couldn't take her eyes off him. The people she met were all middle-aged men or young men. They were all mature. How could they be as fresh as Gong Dai? Not only were his eyebrows picturesque, but his temperament was also unique. It was a kind of temperament that perfectly combined handsomeness and coldness. He was like a banished immortal, just like the description in the book of songs that she read when she was young. But after knowing who Gong Dai was, she was a little unconvinced. Gong Yimo was really lucky. She had everything. It had to be said that Madame Yoonjin was really a young girl with a happy heart. When Gong Yimo came in, she couldn't help but look at Yoonjin's belly. She clicked her tongue in her heart. Even in modern times, a woman in her 40s was considered an advanced age. No matter how well Yoonjin took care of herself, her body was still honest. She could still get pregnant. Then, when she saw that Yoonjin kept staring at Gong Dai, she was a little dissatisfied. She blocked Gong Dai behind her and said to Yoonjin, who was sitting at the top, "Why did the Empress Dowager summon me?" Yoonjin frowned slightly. She felt that Gong Yimo was too casual. She was always talking about herself without any sense of identity. She said softly, "Gong Yimo, you've caused Aijia to suffer so much." Gong Yimo was stunned. "What have I done to you?" Yoonjin reclined on the couch as tears streamed down her face. "If it weren't for your superfluous actions, forcing me to poison Jinxing, why would I need to guard the imperial mausoleum?" Gong Yimo felt a little regretful. After killing the emperor, she only needed to guard the imperial mausoleum. This Kim Yoon, it was because he couldn't bear to be ruthless towards his mother that he became bolder and bolder. However, Gong Yimo had always been rude to her. She said in annoyance, "You're right. I shouldn't have done that back then. Otherwise, you would have reincarnated by now. It seems like I've blocked your good future." "You." Yoonjin's beautiful eyes narrowed, then she looked at Gong Dai and said, "Prince Chi of Dai Yu State, please leave first. Aijia and the princess still have matters to discuss." Gong Dai said indifferently, "There's nothing that can't be heard. Royal sisters' matters are this prince's matters." He finally opened his mouth, but he blocked Yoonjin's words again. Yoonjin felt indignant, but she couldn't do anything about it. She had chased out all the palace servants and no one was helping her. Moreover, the situation was urgent, so she couldn't care less. She might as well cut to the chase. Gong Yimo, a straightforward person, doesn't resort to insinuations. If you can convince Yoon to exempt Aijia from guarding the coffin for 3 years, Aijia will tell you something important that is related to you. Gong Yimo was amused. She didn't believe that there was something that Yoonjin knew that she didn't. Yoonjin's eyes narrowed. "It's related to your birth. This, you want others to know." The others she was referring to was naturally Gong Dai. Gong Yimo suddenly realized something. She looked at Yoonjin thoughtfully. She was afraid that Yoonjin would know that she wasn't the biological daughter of the Dai Yu State's emperor. However, if she asked Gong Dai to leave now, it would be too hurtful. Seeing that she was so nervous, Gong Dai suddenly felt that it was a little strange. Was it about the Shui clan? Then his eyes darkened. It seemed that royal sister still had her secrets that she didn't want him to know. He lowered his eyes and spoke softly. Since that's the case, royal sister, I'm a little tired. I'll go rest first. He was always like this. He always put Gong Yimo first, so Gong Yimo subconsciously pulled him back. She looked conflicted, as if she had made a big decision. It's okay. You stay. Seeing that Gong Dai was only surprised for a moment and then looked at her with a smile, Gong Yimo sighed in relief. Then, she looked at Yunjin nervously. Only the Empress, Empress Dowager, Emperor, and Changxi knew that she wasn't the biological daughter of the Emperor. And for the sake of the Emperor's reputation, these 4 people definitely wouldn't speak carelessly. As for the Shui clan in Luyi, even if they found out that she wasn't the Emperor's biological daughter, it didn't matter. They wouldn't spread the news here. Thinking of this, she calmed down and asked, if you have something to say, just say it. If it's worth my help, I'll consider it. Her tough attitude angered Yunjin, but she was asking for help now. If Gong Yimo didn't help, she might have to give birth to this child. She wasn't willing. But it was even more impossible to guard the imperial tombs with a pregnant belly. If she was found out, she would be thrown into a pig cage. No matter what others said, it was useless. Only Gong Yimo could convince Kim Yoon. So she suppressed her unwillingness and took out the news that she had accidentally obtained to make a deal with Gong Yimo. So with Gong Dai here, she didn't hesitate for long and said it. I think you've already seen the Shui clan. They're the remnants of Shui country, but they still have some ability. Now, other than Daiyu State, they have a certain amount of power in the other 3 countries. They're also your mother's clansmen. Gong Yimo exhaled softly. If that's the case, I already knew. Yunjin smiled slightly, her expression slightly frivolous. Of course it's not just that. The Shui clan is very united, but there are also a few ignorant and incompetent people. One of them, in order to survive, told Aija something interesting. Gong Yimo's interest was slightly aroused. What is it? Yunjin lowered her voice and blinked her charming eyes. Although your Shui clan was destroyed, they still left behind a treasure. Gong Yimo's pupils contracted slightly, then she smiled. Empress Dowager, you probably don't know the reason why the Shui clan was destroyed, right? She looked at Gong Dai and said softly, the Shui clan was too poor, and the winters were hard to endure. They repeatedly invaded the borders of Daiyu State and were destroyed by Imperial Father. How could there be a treasure in a place like this? Gong Yimo didn't believe it. Even if they had some wealth now, it couldn't be so exaggerated that there was a treasure. Who knew that Yunjin just smiled? It seems like you don't know much about your own family. Your Shui clan has always been mysterious, how could the treasure be something ordinary? I heard from him that your clan has a secret method to let people reincarnate in a corpse. It's hidden in the treasure, I don't know if it's true or not. The words reincarnate in a corpse made Gong Yimo frown deeply. She didn't believe in these things. Gong Dai, who was beside her, also frowned slightly, as if he thought of something, but didn't dare to ask. Chapter 379. Yunjin's red lips parted slightly as she sighed. I wonder if this information is enough for you to help Aija once. Gong Yimo rolled her eyes. It's fine if you don't want to guard the Imperial Mausoleum, but you don't want to give birth to this child, do you? If she gave birth to this child, how much trouble would it bring to Kim Yoon in the future? Yunjin glared at her. Can't you see that Gong Dai is right there? Even if Gong Yimo knew the reason, couldn't she be a little more reserved? But now wasn't the time to be reserved. She gritted her teeth and said, if I didn't want to give birth to him, guarding the Imperial Mausoleum wouldn't be a problem at all. At this moment, a trace of helplessness flashed through her eyes. Aija really has no other way, otherwise, Aija wouldn't have come to beg you. Gong Yimo raised her brows slightly and said slowly, since you've said that, I do have an idea. Hurry and say it. Ignoring Gong Dai's strange gaze, Yunjin hurriedly said. Gong Yimo didn't keep her in suspense and said softly, you just have to be buried with the previous emperor. You. Yunjin thought that Gong Yimo didn't want to help her at all and gritted her teeth hatefully. However, Gong Yimo continued. Let Kim Yun give the child's father a piece of land, then change your name and marry him. Wouldn't this kill two birds with one stone? You and the person you love live together, and those officials in the court won't always find fault with you just because they don't like you. Moreover, when you're in the fief, won't you be able to do whatever you want? Even Kim Yun won't be able to control you. Gong Yimo smiled slyly. Of course, this also depends on whether your child's father is willing to be a shield. After all, you're no longer the Empress Dowager, who knows if he's sincere towards you, but even if you aren't the Empress Dowager, with Kim Yun's respect for you, even if that person becomes the head of a territory, it wouldn't be a problem for him to still respect you. It had to be said that Gong Yimo's words really hit the bottom of Yunjin's heart. She hated being stared at by those old courtiers the most and corrected her mistakes. If she was buried with the late emperor, she could still reverse her infamy and gain a good reputation. Moreover, Kim Yun had been keeping an eye on her recently, preventing her from finding a man. If she went out of town, even if she was no longer the Empress Dowager in name, would Wang Jing dare to not comply with her? Wouldn't she be able to get whatever she wanted? However, she was a little worried that Wang Jing, who had always been obedient, would change. However, she had Kim Yun to back her up, so she was not afraid of anything. With that thought in mind, she asked softly, what if Yun doesn't agree? Gong Yimo said with a smile, I'm a very trustworthy person. If I say I'll help you, I'll definitely help you. This matter, just leave it to me. Gong Yimo was also smiling when she came out of Yunjin's place. However, Gong Dai's expression was a little inexplicable. Gong Yimo thought that he was shocked by Yunjin's pregnancy and couldn't help but say. Are you shocked? How can there be such a bold woman in this world? Gong Yimo led Gong Dai to their residence with ease. She remembered the entire Yuheng imperial palace very clearly. Moreover, Kim Yun was really fast. The traces that she had burned back then were almost nowhere to be seen now. It was as if that incident had never happened. Gong Dai followed behind her and suddenly asked, Royal sister, why are you helping her? After all, Yunjin was unfaithful. Even if she was found out, she deserved to be punished. Gong Yimo rubbed her chin and raised her eyebrows slightly. Don't you think this is very interesting? She chuckled. Back then, this woman made things difficult for me and made things difficult for me. Now that I've set her up, there's nothing bad about it. She was too well protected. Even after becoming the Empress Dowager, she was still so naive. She didn't think that if she wasn't the Empress Dowager and that man became the head of the land, how could he still be manipulated by her? Even if Kim Yun supported her, it would be too far away. When that time comes, it'll be fine if she behaves herself. If she's still like this, then her life will be very exciting. I'll be able to take revenge while I'm at it. Speaking of this, she sighed softly. And there's still an unborn child. It's innocent. If it can live, then let it live. Gong Dai's cold and handsome face suddenly looked a little conflicted. He looked at Gong Yimo's flat stomach and said regretfully, Royal sister, do you like children very much? He was a little annoyed. If they didn't have this blood relationship, it would be great to have a child like Royal sister. It would be very blissful. It felt as if he had a big royal sister, just like Momo when they were young. It was the second thing he looked forward to. Gong Yimo was stunned, then she burst out laughing. Gong Dai frowned slightly. This was clearly a sad thing. Why was the royal sister still laughing? Gong Yimo saw that she was looking at her. She stopped smiling and said proudly, "Oh you're not even fully grown yet and you're already thinking of such nonsense. I'm not going to talk to you." Her words caused Gong Dai's face to darken. In Gong Yimo's world, she was still half a year away from 18. She was indeed very young. But wasn't this world better? Gong Dai gritted his teeth. If it wasn't for the fact that there were people coming and going on the palace road, he would definitely let the royal sisters see if he was fully grown. The two of them bickered like this and a day passed. The next day, Kim Yoon's coronation ceremony arrived as scheduled. Gong Yimo heaved a sigh of relief. She really came at the right time. At this time, Kim Yoon had already finished tidying up. Wearing a dragon robe and a golden crown, he was simply too handsome. Because this outfit suppressed the feminine parts of his body, leaving only a heroic and handsome aura. The heavens were really biased. Gong Yimo looked at the beauty in front of her, but she forgot that in other people's eyes, she was also a great beauty. She was the product of the heavens' favoritism to the bones. Hearing Gong Yimo's words, Kim Yoon slightly frowned. There were still 2 hours before the coronation ceremony, but now, he was having a headache for his mother. "Do you really want to do this?" Kim Yoon was unwilling in his heart, because he was afraid that without him watching over her, his mother would become more and more unscrupulous. He was also afraid that without the identity of the Empress Dowager, someone would bully her. Looking at it like this, they didn't look like mother and son, but more like father and daughter. "Do you have a better idea?" Gong Yimo retracted her admiring gaze and said with a solemn expression, "If you don't get rid of her identity as the Empress Dowager now, it's very likely that the one who will inherit your position in the future won't be your child, but your younger brother." Her words were a bit heavy, but Kim Yoon had always listened to her words. Hearing this, he couldn't help but reveal a thoughtful expression. But in his heart, he felt that it wasn't important who would inherit the throne. In the end, that person had the qualifications and ability to sit in this position. His thoughts were easily detected by Gong Yimo. She couldn't help but smile and call out softly, "Kim Yoon." He raised his head to look at her. A pair of sparkling eyes, as well as a cinnabar mole at the corner of his eye, made him look indescribably beautiful. At such a young age, he held great power in his hands, and he was handsome. Kim Yoon had already obtained the best of everything in this world. Gong Yimo sighed slightly and said with a heavy heart, "Do you know that you are the emperor now?" Chapter 380. Kim Yoon was shocked. In fact, everything had happened too naturally. He did not know much about the change in status. Was there a difference between being an emperor and being a prince? Gong Yimo sighed. Now, she felt like she was the old mother. From now on, you are the emperor of Yuheng. You no longer belong to yourself. Your only responsibility and obligation is to make Yuheng prosper. Everything in the past is in the past. From now on, what you yearn for and care about should be the country of Yuheng. Kim Yoon's eyes suddenly flashed with pain. He understood what Gong Yimo meant. But, was this the price to pay for being an emperor? He looked at Gong Yimo and frowned slightly. Can't I even choose the woman I like? Gong Yimo covered her mouth and smiled. That's great. I'm really flattered that you all like me so much. But, have you ever thought about reality? Although she was smiling, her tone was serious. If you really marry me, do you think I can bring more benefits or more disadvantages? Not to mention the benefits, the disadvantages were more obvious, right? Kim Yoon was no longer the Kim Yoon of the past. He stood high and saw far. If he wanted to marry Gong Yimo, it would be impossible before she handed over the firearms. Even if he could keep the position of empress empty and not take any concubines, would the courtiers agree? Would the people of Yuheng agree? He was not doing this because he loved Gong Yimou, but because he was causing trouble for her. Even if he took a step back and thought about it, what if she really married him? This fantasy was sweet, but he did not dare to think about it in the past. Now that he thought about it, he could only sigh sadly. Gong Yimou was not someone who would belong to any country. If she really married Yuheng, with Gong Dai's character, he would definitely start a war. Even if they were willing to start a war over a woman, Immerse was the last thing she wanted to see. Moreover, in the future, when the four countries developed, they would be neck to neck. Gong Yimou could not be the sole owner of a country, or else it would break the balance. The reason why there was no problem now was because the four countries were in a stage of transformation and had no time to care about each other. But in the future, with Immerse's intelligence, if she were to get married, people would definitely think that she was biased towards her husband's country, which would cause dissatisfaction from other countries. Perhaps this was also the reason why she was unwilling to hand over the firearms and was unwilling to get married. She was much more far-sighted than he was. Seeing that he did not speak, Gong Yimou sighed. Balance means development. It's not that I'm overestimating myself, but based on the current situation, I won't marry any monarch. This isn't marriage, it's more like shifting the blame onto someone else. She joked with herself in a relaxed tone. And Kim Yoon immediately thought of the oath that Gong Dai made in front of everyone when he broke the ladder. Gong Dai must have understood this point long ago, so he swore that he would never fight for the throne. He was really prescient. Kim Yoon smiled bitterly. Gong Yimou saw his miserable expression and could not help but comfort him. Brother Kim Yoon, you have to believe that there is no lack of people in this world. They come and go, it doesn't matter. When a person is empty, there will be countless people to replace him. No one will accompany you to the end. Life is a journey of enjoying parting and giving up. Kim Yoon's heart ached. You wouldn't say this in the past. Such sad words shouldn't come out of your mouth. Gong Yimou blinked and smiled. Her expression changed, like an elf. You feel sad. But I don't think so. After one person leaves, you get another person. This is a kind of gain, isn't it? How can your eyes only see the back of one person leaving, but not the smile of another person coming? You have to know that there are two sides to everything. I've always told you to look at the other side. Look at you, have you forgotten again? Kim Yoon suddenly grabbed her finger. His expression was sincere and somewhat fearful. But what can I do? I only want one person. Can't I even have such a small wish as the emperor? Then what's the point of being the emperor? This time, Gong Yimou did not withdraw her hand. Instead, she used her other hand to hold his somewhat cold hand. It's very meaningful. Although every kind of feeling is supreme, there is one thing that is above all feelings. What? Kim Yoon asked subconsciously. Gong Yimou smiled. Her smile was always so bright and beautiful. That pair of clear eyes seemed to contain everything in the world, including everything in the world. It's the throne. She said, you alone carry the hopes of all the people of Yuheng. Just this alone, can't it be above all feelings? She raised her eyebrows slightly. Her tone was faint and filled with endless yearning. Do you know how big this world is? She looked in a certain direction and gestured with her hands. If you keep going north from here, you will reach a world of ice and snow. The glaciers will not melt all year round, and if you keep going south, you will encounter large expanses of blue ocean. There are fish in the North Sea. This has never been a myth. In Yuheng. I'm afraid not many people have seen the sea, right? When she said this, Kim Yoon seemed to have seen the sea from her eyes. He had never seen the sea before, but at this moment, his heart was surging with emotions. He suddenly wanted to see the legendary sea and see if it was as vast as her eyes. Also, on a faraway land, there are people with white skin. Their skin is as white as yours. They have blue and red eyes, and blonde and brown hair. And on another land, there are people with ink-like skin. They are born black. Isn't that amazing? Gong Yimo said softly, you are in your position, so you have to focus on your work. Do you think that it's enough just to make the people of Yuheng rich? People are not animals in captivity. Why can't they go out and see the world? And the force that supports them to leave their homeland and head towards the unknown is not themselves, but their country. So, you have so many things to do. Why do you want to sink into a person, a kind of feeling, a memory? The reason why an emperor is because his climb is endless. Gong Yimo smiled. If you become strong, you can go out to sea with me and see the world together. Why must we be husband and wife? Big brother Kim Yoon. Jin Yun knew that she was only trying to comfort him, or perhaps she was rejecting him. However, she was right. After today, he could no longer do as he pleased. He had to shoulder a heavy responsibility, a very, very heavy responsibility. This was really painful. This was also reality. He looked at Gong Yimo. He did not have the power to open the sea and sky. What could he use to imprison a born eagle? Moreover, her world was much wider than he had imagined. Those white people, black people, the snow and the sea, everything that did not appear in his world existed in her world. This was the real reason. He could not leave everything behind and leave with her. So, he would never be able to enter her world. At this moment, someone announced that the auspicious hour had arrived. Kim Yoon should go out. He closed his eyes. Gong Yimo did not disturb him until he reached out his hand to her. Gong Yimo saw that he was smiling, but his smile looked like he was crying. There was an indescribable sadness. Once, I dreamed of holding your hand and walking to the throne with you. If we can't, I hope that the crown representing the Yuheng Emperor will be crowned by you. Gong Yimo was stunned for a moment, then she smiled. It's my honor. Chapter 381. The four countries sent their congratulations, and hundreds of officials knelt in welcome. Outside Yuheng's newly built Tianqi Hall, both sides of the 399 white jade steps were filled with people. This scene was grand, and it indicated that Yuheng had turned a new page. When Kim Yoon walked to the bottom of the jade steps, he felt his restless heart calm down. He felt everyone's gaze on him, and at that moment, he felt something in his heart. His world might not be as vast as Gong Yimo's, but his starting point was already very high. He had a lot, but he glanced at Gong Yimo, but he didn't have Gong Yimo. He couldn't keep her, he smiled. He also wanted to let go of everything and leave with Immerse, but now, the path to Tianqi Hall was right in front of him, and he couldn't let go. So he brought Gong Yimo here. She had accompanied him through the most difficult times, and he hoped that this most glorious journey would also be with her. The appearance of the two immediately caused a huge uproar. There was no other reason, because at this time, even the Empress couldn't stand by his side. Immediately, a minister came forward to object. Your Majesty, this is not appropriate. She can't go up the white jade stage with you. Jin Yun faintly glanced at him. In that instant, he understood what the Emperor's prestige was and what the Emperor's authority was. She is my coronator. Kim Yoon said this, and it was considered an explanation. That person was even more shocked. Wasn't the coronator already decided? Was it Grand Tutor Wu Jian? Grand Tutor Wu Jian had been a senior official for 3 dynasties, and only he had the qualifications. And this girl, if he wasn't wrong, this was Dai Yu State's princess. What kind of scandal was this? This is not allowed. Your Majesty, please reconsider. As soon as he said this, all the ministers hurriedly shouted, Your Majesty, please reconsider. Kim Yoon held Gong Yimo's hand as they stood at the bottom of the white jade steps. Suddenly, he revealed a smile that Gong Yimo was familiar with. His smile contained confidence. The Kim Yoon who was originally only dazzling on the stage had come alive. He had completely transformed, becoming a stage anytime, anywhere. The humble and courteous second prince was not here. He was the emperor of Yuheng and had his own edge. We have decided. It's her. It's her. This was a notice, not a question. This. The old official's eyes widened as he raised his head. Kim Yoon had already brought Gong Yimo up the white jade stairs. Kim Yoon's tough attitude was a clear indication of his determination. What could these old officials say, no matter how old they were? Thus, the officials no longer made a sound. They watched as this person, who did not belong to Yuheng, was pulled onto the high platform by the emperor. What did it mean to be the center of attention? This was what it meant to be the center of attention. Gong Yimo could not get used to Kim Yoon's sudden change. She was pulled up high by him. At the top were the envoys from the 4 countries and the various kings. They watched as Kim Yoon forcefully brought a woman to accompany him on this heaven-like platform. This was an honor that even the empress would not have. But when they saw who the woman was, they were strangely calm. The Dayu state's envoy stood behind the pale-faced Gong Dai. He secretly thought to himself that their Dayu state's princess was really shameless no matter where she went. Lu Ye's envoy was thinking that it was fortunate that the king did not come. Otherwise, he would definitely go berserk. As for Yu Qi's envoy, he was deep in thought. He glanced at Gong Yimo and revealed a scheming expression. But Kim Yoon did not notice any of this. He pulled Gong Yimo past all the envoys and walked up to the highest platform. At that place, other than the person holding the imperial crown, there was no one else who could stand there. That person was Imperial Tutor Wu Jian. At this moment, he had already retreated a stone's throw away. When he saw Kim Yoon come up, he quickly knelt down and raised the golden plate in his hands. That imperial crown was placed in front of Gong Yimo. Princess, please crown His Highness. Imperial Tutor Wu Jian was an old man in his 70s. He could clearly see that today's crown was being crowned by Dayu State's Gu country's princess. He was one of the earliest people to follow Kim Yoon. He knew how important Gong Yimo was in Kim Yoon's heart. It was no exaggeration to say that without Gong Yimo, there would be no Kim Yoon. Even Yuheng's situation would change. Therefore, he knelt down because she deserved it. Wu Jian was definitely the authority in the hearts of all the old officials. They were still in a daze. But since Imperial Tutor Wu Jian had knelt down and willingly gave up the honor, what else could they say to make the new emperor unhappy? Therefore, they all knelt down and shouted in unison. Princess, please crown His Highness. Princess, please crown His Highness. The shouts were deafening and could almost be heard in the entire Yuheng Imperial Palace. Gong Yimo turned around and saw hundreds of officials kneeling on both sides of the jade platform. When they knelt, the palace servants and guards all knelt down as well. Layer by layer, they were like dominoes that stretched out to the outside of the square. Their expressions could not be seen, but at this moment, their status was at her feet. So what if this was Yuheng? On the highest platform, Kim Yoon actually knelt down on one knee. He looked at Gong Yimo with a sincere expression. "Emperor, please crown me." At this moment, the originally stunned Gong Yimo suddenly felt sour in her heart. Kim Yoon, he had completely placed her in the highest position. So much so that on this day, he was willing to lower his head and let her crown him. Now, in the entire Yuheng Imperial Palace, she was the only one standing. Today, Kim Yoon should be the most dazzling one, and this honor was given to her. Gong Yimo suppressed the surging emotions in her heart and personally removed the crown from Kim Yoon's head. She lifted the crown on the golden plate with both hands and held it high above Kim Yoon's head. Yuhing's fourth emperor, Kim Yoon, please raise your head. According to convention, Gong Yimo could represent the heavens and make Kim Yoon swear 3 oaths. Therefore, her tone was solemn. When their eyes met, their hearts trembled. First, I promise to devote my life to the people and grant Yuhing prosperity. Yes. Kim Yoon closed his eyes and solemnly replied. Gong Yimo looked at him. At this moment, she actually felt that Kim Yoon was in pain. Why was he in pain? Second, I promise to devote my life to peace and grant Yuhing 100 years of peace. Kim Yoon suddenly glanced at her and finally made this promise. Yes. Gong Yimo smiled and gently tied the crown on his head. The 12 strings of beads at the front of the golden crown covered his excessively beautiful eyes. At this moment, in Gong Yimo's heart, Kim Yoon had already become the emperor. But in Kim Yoon's heart, he thought of the night she had left Yuhing, the night he had danced for her, the night she had tied the crown for him. Now that he thought about it, it was still vivid in his mind, but the reality seemed to be a lifetime ago. If he hadn't missed her back then and caught her a little earlier, would the ending have been different? At this moment, he heard Gong Yimo's gentle expectation. Third, I promise to be happy. Kim Yoon suddenly looked at her. At this moment, the beads on his forehead collided, showing the turbulent emotions in his heart. Chapter 382. Gong Yimo said softly as she adjusted his crown. In my opinion, there's nothing more important than your happiness. Kim Yoon Gij, can you promise me? Kim Yoon's lips tightened, loosened, and tightened again. This moment was so unbearable. Finally, he took a deep breath, lowered his head, and responded with a single word. Yes. Gong Yimo smiled and helped him up. The moment their hands clasped, it was like the scene in his dream, when Mo became his empress. But reality was so cruel that he had to recognize that this was only an ascension ceremony. He held Gong Yimo's hand tightly, unwilling to let go. Then, he led Gong Yimo to face the crowd. At that moment, Wu Jian kowtowed for the first time and said loudly, Emperor ascending the throne, cheers. All the officials hurriedly kowtowed and cheered. Long live, Wu Jian kowtowed again. Cheers, long live. Cheers again. Long live. Together, Gong Yimo could only hear the earth-shattering cheers. Cheers of a long live, long live, long live, long live, long live, resounded through the sky. This was the official's most sincere wish for the new emperor. This moment was so emotional that Gong Yimo even had the illusion that the world was under her feet. This was royalty, this was the ruler. At this time, Kim Yoon stood beside her, looked at her, and whispered. In this life, I can't keep you, but if one day you're tired of flying and want to turn back, I'll always be waiting for you in Yuhing. He pointed at the people prostrating below the stage and said in a deep voice. These people, this Yuhing's empire, it belongs to me, but it also belongs to you. Gong Yimo raised her head in astonishment, but at this moment, she could no longer see Jin Yunju's eyes. She could only see him clenching her hand tightly. Finally, he clenched it very hard, then released it. Kim Yoon received the golden cup from Grand Tutor Wu Jian with both hands and held it up high as a sacrifice to heaven. May Yuhing prosper and last for 100 generations. Long live, long live, long live. At that moment, he was the supreme emperor of the world. It was also his most glorious moment. At that moment, Gong Yimo was standing beside him, looking at him, but she was so close, yet so far away. At this moment, Gong Emo felt a sudden pain in her heart. She looked down and saw Gong Ju standing in the middle of the noisy crowd, looking at her. No matter what time it was, he was always the center of attention. No matter where she stood, as long as she turned around, she would be able to see him. There were people in this world who were willing to conquer vast territories for you, and would also be willing to contribute these territories to you. In this world, there were also people who could give up the glory of being an emperor, give up their country, give up their beauties, and even give up their nature. They could suppress their desire to kill, all for you. It was Gong Dai. Gong Emo's heart began to pound. She looked at him and suddenly smiled. In this kind of environment, no one knew who she was smiling at, but with her simple yellow dress and simple hairstyle, she gave people the feeling that her smile could topple cities. A beautiful person didn't need too much embellishment or background. She herself was the best scenery in the world. When she was hidden, she was already beautiful. When she was revealed, she was unparalleled in the world. Grand Tutor Wu Jian, who had retreated off the stage, was also stunned by this smile. He suddenly understood why the young emperor found it difficult to let go of the princess of Dai Yu state. It was because, whether it was her talent or her own body, she could attract the world's attention and subdue millions of people. Gong Emo, her name would be recorded in the history books along with Yu Hing's new chapter. This was a glory that belonged to her alone. After the coronation ceremony, Gong Dai and Kim Yoon discussed the Three Kingdoms horse farm. With the Three Kingdoms renovating it at the same time, the horse farm would be built very quickly. The relay station on the horse farm was owned by Gong Emo. Even if Kim Yoon didn't want Gong Emo's money, Gong Dai still gave Kim Yoon the money needed to renovate the relay station. He also took out a blueprint and asked him to build it according to Gong Emo's requirements. Kim Yoon looked at it and knew that the blueprint really did come from Gong Emo. It was just a relay station, a temporary place to stay. Why did it have to be so unique? And every relay station was named Xingshe Relay Station. Since it had to be named, why didn't it have different names? At this time, the concept of a chain wasn't very strong, but if it was Gong Emo's request, Kim Yoon would definitely do it. After the other details of the cooperation were settled, there wasn't much to say. Gong Dai directly said goodbye. Kim Yoon, who had already become emperor, wore a dragon robe and sat on the dragon throne. When he heard Gong Dai say that he was leaving, he suddenly put down the cinnabar pen in his hand and looked at Gong Dai. Gong Dai sat on a wooden armchair to the side. Although he was older than Gong Dai by a few years, Gong Dai's calm and collected aura wasn't any worse than him, the emperor. Kim Yoon even saw Mo's figure in him. Gong Dai. He really loved Mo. When one loved someone to the extreme, they would intentionally learn everything about her. Even someone as strong as Gong Dai couldn't escape this rule. You're leaving. Kim Yoon was rather reluctant. Of course, it wasn't that he was reluctant to part with Gong Dai. Gong Dai's slightly cold ink-black eyes glanced at Kim Yoon. The matter is over. Emperor Yuheng, is there anything else? He had already found out from the royal sister that she and Kim Yoon had made things clear. So even if he didn't like Kim Yoon, Gong Dai still sat here with a rare good tone. Kim Yoon sighed. That's right. Could he keep her? He laughed bitterly. Gong Dai, you really like him, don't you? Gong Dai's fingertips gently rubbed the edge of the blue and white porcelain cup. He spoke in a very cold and direct tone. Yes, I love her very much. Kim Yoon didn't expect that a person as cold as Gong Dai would speak of the word love without any hesitation. No wonder Mo treated him differently. A trace of bitterness appeared on his face. He laughed bitterly. That's good. Mo, she also chose you. Even if you have that kind of status, sometimes I feel that you have it even harder than me. For today's outcome, you must have sacrificed a lot. His expression turned serious. But you're still too young. The world is full of flowers that gradually confuse people's eyes. If one day, you let down, we'll definitely not let you off, even if you die, that day won't come. Gong Dai stared at him. His cold voice was laced with murderous intent. Every time someone tried to provoke his reverse scale, he would reveal such a ferocious gaze. He looked at them as if they were dead objects. For a moment, Kim Yoon couldn't breathe under his gaze. Then, he felt a little angry. He felt that Gong Dai was looking down on him too much. Gong Dai had already stood up. You'll never know what I can do for her. Your worries are unnecessary. Gong Dai sneered. Tomorrow, this prince will leave with royal sister. Emperor Yuheng is busy, so please don't send me off. After he finished speaking, he turned and left. Kim Yoon was so angry that he slapped away the documents on the table. His chest heaved up and down as he gritted his teeth and said in a low voice. Gong Dai, you better do what you say. Chapter 383. Gong Yimo saw that Kim Yoon did not want to see her off. She thought that perhaps he was afraid of being reminded of the past, so she did not say much. After bidding farewell to him, she left the Yuheng Imperial Palace. Kim Yoon stood in the study, watching Gong Yimo bid farewell and leave. Her expression was free and at ease. Perhaps there was some reluctance, but not to the extent that she was reluctant to part with him. The world was very big, so big that the separation between people could be eternal. Therefore, the most moving poems would always be farewell poems, and the most heart-wrenching feelings were all unattainable. Take care, Amour. As long as I live, I will wait for you in Yuheng. Gong Yimo was originally feeling a little down. Kim Yoon was really a very good person, but in this era, it was really too difficult to see him. Perhaps the next time they met, he would already have a wife and children, and would have forgotten her. Gong Dai saw that Gong Yimo was not in high spirits and frowned slightly. He urged his horse forward, and said something that she might be interested in. Royal sister, this is the former snow country. Do you want to see the treasure that the Empress Yuheng mentioned? Gong Yimo was taken aback, and then smiled. They said it was a treasure. How could it be so easy to find it? If the Snow clan found it, they would not say it. Perhaps they themselves do not know where it is, so how can we find it? Gong Dai naturally understood this. He rode on his horse, looking at the horizon in the distance, and suddenly asked softly. Royal sister, in this world, do you really think there is a secret technique that can let people borrow a corpse to return their soul? Gong Yimo was shocked, and could not help but look at Gong Dai. She saw that he seemed to be speaking casually, and had a very casual expression. Gong Yimo suppressed her heartbeat, and said calmly. How can that be? The secret technique of using a corpse to return one's soul must be a lie. Even if there really is someone who can use a corpse to return their soul, it is definitely a coincidence. The secret technique does not exist. Gong Yimo was very sure that the world she was in was very real. From the Han Dynasty to the present, it was a different time and space of Earth. Perhaps it was related to the theory of parallel space, but there was no such thing as ghosts and gods. And perhaps she accidentally encountered a time and space crack, and her body mutated, so she could break the time and space barrier again and again. But Gong Dai only heard one sentence, and that was what the royal sister said. If there really was someone who could use a corpse to return their soul, it must be a coincidence. His heart was pounding. If there really was someone who could use a corpse to return to life, then would that person be the royal sister? This could explain why she to the present, of course, the things that she did not to the present, until now, she to the present, 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 to the things she do, not to the things that she did. Perhaps thinking deeper, she was an otherworldly person who suddenly appeared in this body. Would there be a day when she would leave this body, and he would not know? No, no, what was he thinking? Gong Dai pursed his lips tightly, and at this moment, Gong Yimo suddenly pointed at the city wall in front of them and smiled. Gong Dai, we have arrived at Wanqing. Gong Dai regained his senses and looked. Indeed, it was Wanqing. Last time, he caught the royal sister here, and the royal sister also activated the 6th stage of martial arts, unity of heaven and man here. Gong Yimo's feelings towards Wanqing were very complicated, because the last time she was here, in that dilapidated temple, she seemed to have seen her appearance before she died in her previous life. But this time, her heart was much calmer, and she wanted to bring Gong Dai to take a look. After entering the city, such a large group of people would be very eye-catching. After Gong Yimo brought Gong Dai to eat something, the others found an inn to settle down, and she brought Gong Dai to the dilapidated temple. The scenery along the way was the same, but the refugees at the dilapidated temple were gone. Now that Dai Yu state was peaceful, it was a good time for development. As long as one was willing to work, one would not starve to death. So in the past, most of the refugees here learned how to swim, and then went to work on boats. But this dilapidated temple was still there. It had witnessed the coming and going of so many people, and it had remained standing. When Gong Dai walked in, he had a bad feeling. Ever since he touched the black stone that was the royal sister, there seemed to be an additional connection between him and the royal sister, but he did not mention this matter. When Gong Yimo walked in, she realized that this place had not changed at all, but the people here had changed. She never thought that one day, she would come here with Gong Dai. And today, she did not have any other intentions, she just wanted to bring Gong Dai to pay her respects. In her heart, she actually wanted to let go of the memory of being tortured and killed, and really give Gong Dai a chance. But for no reason, she really could not let go of the knot in her heart, and she felt that she might gain something by coming here to take a look. Coming here during the day, it felt very quiet. The sunlight shone in through the hole in the window, and they could even see the rising smoke. Gong Yimo looked at the benevolent-looking bodhisattva above, and pulled Gong Dai to kneel down and pay her respects. Bodhisattva, oh Bodhisattva, please give me some guidance. What should I do? After Gong Yimo thought to herself, she felt that she was ridiculous. She, a person who did not believe in ghosts and gods, actually came here to pay her respects to Bodhisattva for some personal feelings. Meanwhile, Gong Dai felt that the strange feeling was getting stronger and stronger. He raised his head to look at Bodhisattva's face, and only felt that that smile seemed more like a sneer. Gong Dai, let's go. After paying her respects, Gong Yimo felt a little better, and she turned her head to pull Gong Dai and prepared to leave. But who knew that when she turned her head, she would actually scream and retreat. Gong Dai was frightened by her scream, and he quickly came over to pull her, but Gong Yimo actually slapped his hand away with a very frightened expression. Feeling the slapping on his hand, Gong Dai looked at Gong Yimo strangely, not understanding what was going on. Royal sister. What's wrong with you? I'm Gong Dai. He suddenly shouted in a very loud voice, and only then did Gong Yimo wake up from her dream. She patted her face and realized that it was really Gong Dai, but at this moment, her heart was beating very fast, and there seemed to be cold sweat on her forehead, which made Gong Dai even more uneasy. What's wrong? Gong Dai asked softly, afraid that he would provoke her sensitive nerves. Gong Yimo smiled with a pale face, nothing, maybe I've been too tired recently, and actually started hallucinating. Wasn't it just a hallucination? When she turned her head just now, the person she saw was not the current Gong Dai, but the regent from her previous life who sneered and broke her finger. The feeling just now was too real. When he turned his head and sneered at her, it was as if she had returned to the death row in an instant. Gong Yimo touched the stone at her waist. It seemed that this thing might still affect her. It might be useful, but it seemed to be more harmful. However, she looked at Bodhisattva strangely, and her heart was suspicious. Was there something wrong with this rundown temple? She stared up and suddenly felt that the cinnabar mole between Bodhisattva's eyebrows seemed a little strange. Chapter 384. Why was it strange? Because the Bodhisattva had been in disrepair for a long time, the paint on her body had faded. However, the cinnabar between her eyebrows was still very bright, like a bead embedded in it. After Gong Yimo felt a little better, she inexplicably went forward, climbed up the lotus seat, and reached out to touch the protrusion. Gong Dai, who was standing below, was still a little confused. He always felt that royal sister was avoiding him, so she turned to look at the Bodhisattva. But why? He clearly did not do anything, so why was royal sister sometimes afraid of him? He only wanted to love her. Gong Yimo's heart was pounding, not because of the Bodhisattva in front of her, but because the illusion just now was too terrifying. She did not know how to face Gong Dai. At this moment, she hoped that Gong Dai would stay as far away from her as possible. In this moment of absent-mindedness, she reached out to touch the cinnabar between the Bodhisattva's eyebrows. As a result, something strange happened. Be careful. Gong Dai immediately flew forward to catch Gong Yimo, but it was too late. The two of them fell into the tunnel together, and as soon as they fell, the Bodhisattva rose up again. It looked as if no one had been here before. The two of them fell vertically at first, then finally landed on a slope and rolled down. Gong Dai quickly used his body to protect Gong Yimo, and Gong Yimo was one step faster to protect his head. As a result, the two of them did not suffer any injuries after falling down. Are you okay? Gong Yimo quickly asked. There were many strange protrusions along the way, and Gong Dai must have suffered a lot of internal injuries in order to protect her. I'm fine. In the darkness, Gong Dai quietly glanced at Gong Yimo. Although he could not see clearly, her bright eyes proved that she was not injured. This made Gong Dai slightly relieved, and he was a little reluctant to let go of her. However, Gong Yimo wouldn't just sit there and wait for death. She let go of Gong Dai and stood up. Then, she took out a flashlight from the space. She had never used this thing before, but she didn't expect it to come in handy today. The sudden light made Gong Dai panic for a moment. He didn't feel it when he was young, but now, the more he saw Gong Yimo take out something that didn't belong to this era, the more nervous he became. It was as if he couldn't keep her at all. Therefore, Gong Dai held Gong Yimo's hand tightly. The two of them observed their surroundings for a while and decided to move forward. This dark passageway seemed to have been built for a very long time. Gong Yimo sighed. Don't tell me you're right and we've fallen into some kind of treasure. Because they had fallen vertically, it was impossible for them to go back the way they came, and the future was unknown. Gong Yimo sighed at her bad luck and joked with Gong Dai again. Gong Dai closed his eyes and felt for a moment. There's wind. We can go out. After he said that, Gong Yimo felt a lot more at ease. Gong Dai was still calm. He wasn't afraid at all. She was a little afraid of this kind of claustrophobic space. This tunnel seemed to have no end. The stone walls were slippery, as if they had been smeared with some kind of black mucus. Therefore, Gong Yimo felt disgusted and stopped moving after touching it. Why did this damn place look so creepy? Maybe it was someone's tomb. An underground palace. She didn't have any intention of robbing a tomb. Suddenly, she slipped and was supported by Gong Dai. Be careful. Gong Yimo looked and saw that the ground was also covered with that kind of strange black mucus. She felt a little disgusted, but she still forced a smile and said, "It's okay. This place has been sealed for a long time. There's no one here. I'm not afraid." Gong Dai said softly, "This place is a little strange. Look, there are no plants here. It's so strange. It's better to be careful." When he said that, Gong Yimo suddenly felt a chill down her spine. Then, she shone her flashlight repeatedly and found that there were really no plants. There wasn't even moss. This didn't make sense. Could it be that the black mucus was causing trouble? It was very quiet underground. Originally, Gong Yimo only thought of this place as an ordinary underground palace. However, after hearing Gong Dai's words, she suddenly felt a chill down her spine. At this moment, her light beam suddenly swept over something. Gong Yimo was shocked. It looked like a person. Gong Dai quickly protected Gong Yimo behind him and pulled her forward. It really was a person. But to be precise, it was a dried corpse. Gong Yimo wanted to look, but Gong Dai covered her eyes. "Don't look. What's wrong?" Gong Ju was shocked by the seriousness in Gong Ju's tone. "It's just a dried corpse. Maybe this is an underground palace, and this person was buried with a slave." She didn't want to think too much about this matter. Gong Dai carefully looked at the dried corpse, and then pulled Gong Yimo forward. "We didn't accidentally enter the tomb." As they walked, Gong Dai pulled her tightly and said, "Rumor has it that the people of Snow Country have a lot of witchcraft rituals. This place is most likely an abandoned ritual ground. Just like that person just now. Before he died, his heart was dug out while he was still alive. Even after becoming a dried corpse, his ferocious expression was still clearly visible. So, he didn't want Gong Yimo to look. He was afraid that she would feel uncomfortable." When he said that, Gong Yimo's expression became serious. However, after thinking about it, no one knew how many years it had been since someone came here. Even if something terrible happened here, what did it matter? Could there be ghosts? Suddenly, Gong Yimo stopped abruptly. Gong Dai looked back at her. "What's wrong?" Because the flashlight was shining in front, he didn't notice how pale Gong Yimo's face was. I'm fine," Gong Yimo said after a while. Could she say that she felt as if a small hand had patted her ankle just now? It was probably an illusion, she thought. The two of them continued to walk forward. On the way, they met a few dried corpses, but Gong Dai didn't let her see them. So, Gong Yimo only knew that these corpses had their hearts dug out while they were still alive. After walking through the passageway, they came to a large stone room. It was still very simple. There were only 6 stone platforms, facing the center, arranged in the shape of a sun. On each platform, there was a person lying, and they were all dried corpses. This passageway was very strange. Why didn't these corpses rot but were only dehydrated? This time, Gong Dai couldn't block Gong Yimo's view. She found that these people were all tied to the stone platforms. Moreover, everyone's upper body was cut open by a blade. It was just that the position of the cut was different. Gong Yimo clicked her tongue. It's so scary to be uncivilized. Fortunately, I didn't grow up in Snow Country, thinking that if Snow Country was still here, and her cheap father was the king of the Snow Country, she didn't know what strange thing she would be forced to do. Chapter 385. Ignoring Gong Dai's attempts to stop her, Gong Yimo went forward to take a look. She realized that these people had indeed died very miserably, so she did not look at their faces. Instead, she took out a dagger and poked at the part of their body that was cut open to see the reason why it was cut open. Seeing Gong Yimo touch the corpse, Gong Dai could not bear for her to do it, so he took the dagger from her hand and said, "Royal sister, what do you want to see? Let me do it." His actions made Gong Yimo feel very warm. She said softly, "I just want to see what he's missing." Gong Dai flipped open his abdomen. When he was young, Gong Yimo had drawn a detailed diagram of the human body for him. Later on, in Zhao prison, he had also experimented on those corpses, so he had a certain understanding of the human body. He's missing a stomach. Although there was only a flashlight, Gong Dai was still very certain. Then he walked to the next corpse and casually flipped through it. He doesn't have guts. Gong Yimo thought about it. In the end, after a round of examination, she realized that they were missing a stomach, gallbladder, small intestine, large intestine, bladder, and 3 cavities. Missing 6 organs. Gong Yimo suddenly felt that she was rather bored. Instead of finding a way out, she was actually flipping through the dried corpses left behind by the previous sacrifices. It was just a foolish folklore. Snow Country was already destroyed, what was there to look into? Then they continued to walk forward. There was another long and narrow corridor, and then they arrived at another stone room. In the process, the number of corpses on the ground increased, but without exception, all of them had their hearts dug out. This stone room was the same as the previous one, except that the 6 stone platforms had turned into 5, and the people on the platforms had also taken out something with a knife on their upper body. Gong Yimo said, "There's no need to look. The person in the stone room just now was missing 6 organs. This stone room has 5 stone platforms, so what's missing must be the 5 organs. I don't know why they killed these people, and even dug out their hearts." Who? As Gong Yimo was speaking, a small black shadow suddenly jumped under the light of the flashlight. Gong Yimo said hurriedly, but she couldn't see anything when she looked over. It was really strange. Seeing that she was nervous, Gong Dai also sank his chi into his dantian to sense carefully. There was no third person's aura here. "Royal sister, what's wrong?" Gong Dai felt that something was wrong with Gong Yimo recently. There's no third person here. On the way here, he had carefully observed the surroundings. Other than them, there were no other traces of outsiders. Gong Yimo also felt that her eyes were playing tricks on her. She pointed at the stone on her waist in annoyance. "Maybe this damn thing is affecting me. I have to throw it away when I get out." Gong Dai felt that it wasn't just that, but they were underground now, so it wasn't appropriate for them to talk about this. "Then let's talk about it outside." He patted Gong Yimo's head comfortingly and pulled her forward. The underground air was circulating, which meant that there must be an exit. He didn't want to stay underground for too long in case of accidents. After passing through another tunnel, they arrived at another stone room. However, this stone room was different. There were more than 20 people kneeling on the ground. They were all kneeling with their heads lowered and their hands crossed in front of their chests. When they first came in, Gong Yimo was shocked. She was afraid that when the light shone on them, they would all turn their heads. This place is too strange. The temperature is very low, but it shouldn't be to the extent of turning into dried corpses, right? Moreover, their clothes were all in good condition. The preservation was done well. Gong Dai saw that Gong Yimo was intentionally hiding behind him and couldn't help but smile dotingly. Maybe it's because of the black liquid that there's no life here. No life, no plants, no animals, not even microbes. Gong Yimo nodded. However, looking at the pile of dried corpses on the ground with their backs facing them, she still couldn't accept it. What are they doing? Gong Dai saw that there was an exquisitely carved stone seat in front of them. In front of the stone seat was a large cauldron. And these people seemed to be devoutly welcoming someone, maintaining their kneeling posture even after death. Gong Ju gently pulled her by the hand and led her to the stone seat. When they passed by the large cauldron, Gong Yimo glanced at it and almost vomited. She was wondering where the hearts that were dug out went. She didn't expect that they were all soaked in here. In the black viscous water, the hearts didn't dry up. That was amazing. From the position of the stone seat, they could see the faces of the dried corpses. Although it wasn't very clear, they didn't seem to be struggling. All of them had their heads lowered and looked at the ground, as if they were willing to die. Without exception, all of them had sacrificed their hearts. At this moment, Gong Yimo discovered something and exclaimed, "Gong Dai, there are words behind the stone seat." Gong Dai walked over to take a look and discovered that the words were unique to the snow country. Fortunately, Gong Dai had a photographic memory and actually knew what was written here. So this is really the place where the snow country sacrificed. Gong Dai saw something and narrowed his eyes, but he still explained in a soft voice. When the snow country was destroyed, the remaining Snow Clan people harbored hatred in their hearts, so they wanted to use the secret method of reincarnation to summon the evil spirit and slaughter the country and the world. Gong Yimo couldn't help but frown when she heard this. These people are really... I don't understand their thoughts. Could it be that they killed so many people for such a non-existent matter? Slaughter the country and the world, their imagination is quite rich. They don't want others to have a good life because they don't want others to have a good life. Gong Dai did not speak. His fingertips moved down, wiping away the dust, and continued to look at the words behind and said softly. What you think is a non-existent matter, these remaining snow country people have been preparing for nearly 4 years. The people who died were not all from the Snow Clan. At least in the corridor just now, those people were selected by a secret method as living sacrifices. Only the people in this stone room are the ones that the Snow Clan is willing to sacrifice. Gong Yimo was even more depressed. The country has been destroyed for 4 years. In such a long time, instead of thinking about being down to earth and good people, they killed so many people to complete a meaningless sacrifice. So, the destruction of the snow country is not without reason. In her view, this was simply a lack of intelligence, but counting the time, so much time had passed. It had nothing to do with her. Let's go. Anyway, there are no treasures here. Let's get out of here quickly. It's too depressing to stay here. Gong Dai nodded and was ready to take her away. But at this time, the flashlight swept across, Gong Yimo's expression suddenly became serious. This time, she was sure that she was not hallucinating. Gong Dai. Gong Yimo pointed at the group of corpses kneeling on the ground and said slowly and seriously, "Look at that person." When we came in, everyone was kneeling with their heads down. Why is he raising his head? Gong Dai also remembered this, so he pulled out his sword and said to Gong Yimo, "Don't be afraid, let's continue." Gong Yimo frowned and looked at the corpse that raised his head. Because it was just a quick glance, she did not see anything at the back of his head. It was black and very strange. Chapter 386. When they finally reached the end, there was no path in front of them. This didn't make sense. They were clearly breathing smoothly. Gong Yimo suddenly thought of something. She lowered her head and shone the flashlight on her ankle. It was fine if she didn't shine it, but when she did, her heart skipped a beat. What's wrong? Gong Dai's voice echoed in the space. It was already cold, but now it sounded even colder. Gong Yimo took a deep breath and said seriously, "When I was walking in the corridor, I stopped for a moment. Do you remember?" Gong Dai frowned slightly as he thought of her strange behavior. "At that time, I stopped because I felt a small hand patting my ankle." Gong Dai heard this and looked at the direction of her flashlight. He saw a small black handprint on her long clothes. There was a small thing. Its hand might have touched the black mucus on the wall and imprinted on her clothes. At this moment, the two of them didn't speak. Gong Dai suddenly said, "Don't be afraid. It should be a living thing." Gong Yimo nodded solemnly. "If it is, then we should be able to get out by following it. There was nothing in this space, so that things should be where they came from." The two of them continued to walk back. Gong Dai thought that she was afraid and held her hand tightly. "Who knew that?" Gong Yimo said angrily. "The Shui people are really bored. They spent so many years to create this place, and I don't know what kind of monster they created." Gong Dai said, "We will get out. Don't be afraid." "Of course we have to get out." Gong Yimo rolled her eyes and deliberately said loudly, "If we can't find the exit, I will blow up this place. There is no value in keeping it anyway." When she said that, she suddenly felt a chill on her back. Gong Dai's reaction was faster than her. There was a sharp cry. He suddenly reached out and grabbed that thing. It was trying to sneak an attack on Gong Yimo, but how could it be a match for Gong Dai? Therefore, with Gong Dai around, she would feel safe wherever she went. Gong Yimo sighed in her heart. She looked at the furry thing in his hand and found it hard to accept. She took a closer look and realized that it was actually a monkey. At this moment, it was baring its fangs and brandishing its claws. Without thinking, it tried to scratch Gong Dai's arm with its little claws, but how could Gong Dai let it succeed? He exerted force in his hand. Its claws were pulled down and it let out a weak whimper. "Why is there a monkey here?" Gong Yimo was stunned. Could it be that the people of Snow Country spent 4 years and sacrificed hundreds of people just to summon a monkey? Why did she suddenly feel like the terrifying atmosphere was swept away, and she even felt like laughing? Even if the monkey's eyes were red, it didn't look like it could destroy the world, right? Ha 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 ha. Although she laughed, she still hurriedly took out a rope from her space and tied it around its neck. At this time, Gong Dai's eyes flashed with an ominous light. He stared at the monkey and coldly said, "Take us out, or else, I'll kill you." The monkey had just regained its freedom and was threatened and trapped. It first tried to grab the rope, but when it realized that it had broken, it looked at Gong Dai with a very human-like gaze. Finally, it squeaked a few times and signaled for Gong Dai to follow it. Gong Yimo wasn't afraid of a monkey lying. The two of them followed it, only to see it reach the place with the giant cauldron and the stone pedestal. It pointed at the giant cauldron and kept repeating the action of "eat." Gong Yimo was disgusted. "It wants us to eat people's hearts. The people's hearts in the cauldron can't all be its food." Thinking of this, she used a dagger to lightly poke the little monkey's body and fiercely said, "We don't eat this plaything, don't play tricks. Quickly take us out, now." At this moment, Gong Yimo actually saw a trace of human-like ridicule in the monkey's eyes. It suddenly slapped the cauldron's body twice, causing Gong Yimo to lose her footing and fall down again. Gong Dai held onto her tightly, while she held onto the monkey with one hand. The moment she fell, she was surrounded by water. There was a lake, and the water was flowing. It meant that there was an exit. As the flashlight was waterproof, she could see the monkey struggling in the water under the light of the flashlight. But at the same time, she also saw many fish. Many of them were white and spindle-shaped. There were so many that it made one's scalp tingle. She didn't have time to see what kind of fish it was before Gong Ju grabbed her and dragged her out. At the same time, she smelled the scent of blood. "This fish is fishy." Hearing Gong Dai say that, Gong Yimo was shocked. She turned around and saw a fish only a palm's distance away from her eyes. Gong Yimo could clearly see the sharp teeth in its mouth. It was a piranha. These fish were afraid of sunlight, so they only lived in the dark underground. If they fell down like this, wouldn't they be adding to the fish's meal? Fortunately, Gong Dai had transformed his internal energy the moment he was bitten. He also hugged Gong Yimo in his arms to protect her. Otherwise, she would have been bitten by these fish the moment she fell down. However, the transformation of internal energy didn't take long. They had to get out of danger as soon as possible. At this moment, Gong Yimo suddenly saw that none of the piranha around the monkey attacked it. She suddenly had an absurd idea. Could it be that only by eating the human heart in the cauldron would one be able to avoid the piranha's attacks? Was that why the monkey let them eat it just now? While she was hesitating, Gong Dai had already swum for a long time with her in his arms. The fish were clustered around them and didn't disperse. Even the flashlight's light couldn't shine out. However, whenever they bit over, they would be repelled by Gong Dai's internal energy. Although he wasn't injured for the time being, this was very strenuous for Gong Dai. We must find a solution. Gong Yimo's eyes were sharp. She pulled the little monkey over and quickly made a cut on his hand. A strange thing happened. The monkey was originally gloating, but when it was injured, it let out a strange cry. The moment the trace of black blood floated in the water, the area within a radius of 1 or 2 meters immediately became a vacuum. Not a single piranha dared to approach. The little monkey screamed in anger, but its injured hand was held tightly by Gong Yimo. She used its blood to open a path and swam outside. Gong Yimo was right. If eating the human heart in the cauldron could restrain the piranha, then the little monkey must have eaten a lot. Sure enough, its blood was the bane of the piranha, allowing them to breathe. Let's go, Gong Dai said in a deep voice. The two of them used the monkey's blood to open a path and swam outside. The piranha followed closely behind, but they didn't dare to get too close. They always kept a distance of 2 meters. They didn't know how long they swam. Finally, when a beam of light appeared, all the piranha turned back. They finally got out of that broken place. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.